This story begins with the petitioner's request being granted and her wish being fulfilled. But before that, the woman in the dark veil decides to ask our heroine something. She wonders if the girl really wants her wish to come true. In response, our heroine only smiles, since she had already decided everything for herself long ago. Meanwhile, events unfold in one majestic castle of the city. The whole family gathered around the table to enjoy the meal. At this time, Her Highness is distracted by a servant who came with important news. It would not be proper to announce this during dinner, but His Majesty ordered something to be conveyed to the woman. It appears that the kingdom's army has surrendered to Carlo's empire, and dark times have arrived for all present. And tomorrow at noon, we can expect Emperor Carlo to pay them a visit. And all 5 princesses are required to attend the welcoming ceremony. But the girls are very surprised that they all have no right to refuse. Then one of the princesses asks to tell their father that they understand everything and will carry out his order. However, the girl's sister indignantly reports that various rumors are circulating in the empire. Emperor Carlo is considered a cold-blooded and ruthless tyrant. He is even called a bloodthirsty ruler, since he overthrew his own brother for the throne. After this, can one really hope that such a person will show mercy? Moreover, there are rumors that Carlo plans to take one of the princesses hostage and make her his empress. Panic breaks out among the sisters, and even Riley can't stop them. Then, one of them gets up from the table and attracts the attention of everyone present. After this, the pink-haired girl announces that she is ready to leave first, since lunch is already over. However, her sister is very angry that she pretends that none of this concerns her. At the same time, Liliana leaves the dining room and closes the door with sadness in her eyes. Suddenly, a servant appears before her, who must convey words intended only for her personally. As the man prepares to take our heroine to the office, Liliana realizes that the time has come. Right now, they will give the princess as a hostage, who will belong to the new emperor. And it won't be Riley, who has great authority among the sisters. And even the other princesses will not be needed by Emperor Carlo. At this moment, the servant notices that the girl has somehow frozen in place. The whole point is that Liliana is destined to become the emperor's hostage. In fact, this world belongs to the novel of the pink-haired princess, who will not be abandoned. It so happens that this princess with pink hair is our heroine. At the same time, the maid calms the girl and asks her not to be sad. After all, becoming an empress means that she has risen to the top and received many advantages. But if Liliana were the main female character, then there really wouldn't be anything to worry about. The beautiful pink-haired heroine melted the emperor's heart and was loved by everyone. But Liliana's own fate will turn out in such a way that she will become the mother of this heroine and die shortly after giving birth. This is what usually happens in romantic fantasy stories, where the protagonist's mother dies early. Instead of a happy, long life, Liliana will be made a hostage, after which she will not receive a drop of love from the arrogant emperor. It all began with the history of the small kingdom of Nieta, which produces high-quality magical stones. For some reason, the kingdom raised the prices of stones, and Emperor Carlo issued several warnings. But nothing changed, and the emperor declared war, during which Nita lost and had to give up her daughter to King Carlo. Driven by reckless greed, the king was forced to lose one of his 5 daughters. After this, the father called Liliana to him and informed her that she would be the one going to the empire. The girl did not understand why the king chose her out of all the sisters. It is obvious that Liliana was not a favorite daughter, as she was born to a commoner maid. If she leaves everything as is, she will remain a forgotten princess locked in a palace for the rest of her life. And if she is taken hostage, she is destined to die soon after giving birth. But Liliana decides not to think that she only has these 2 choices. Since the emperor will arrive tomorrow at noon, the girl decides to ask the maid Sophia to collect the extra tablecloths and curtains. As night approached, when the entire king's castle was asleep, Liliana began her plan. Unnoticed by anyone, she walked down from her room onto the street, using sheets tied together. One part of the plan is left behind, and now Liliana must begin the most difficult stage. Around the corner, our heroine discovers men who serve the king. Not many people walk around the northern part of the palace, not counting the stables. As she expected, there were only 3 people gathered here, but for some reason, the chamberlain was with them. It was unlikely that he should be in such a place at such a late hour, and especially with a groom. Liliana overhears the conversation and realizes that the chamberlain is interested in the king. The servant explains that at such a late hour he is already asleep, but the butler went to him with a message. Therefore, the king of Nieta will soon be able to meet with the chamberlain, and Liliana at this time cannot help but notice how handsome this man is. But at that very second, she remembers that now is not the time for such thoughts. And while the men are talking, it's time to get out of this castle. Liliana is still from the royal family, and the money for the jewelry she took should be enough for her. However, she needs to get a horse and cross the border without revealing her identity. At this moment, the servant suggests that the chamberlain go to the palace. But first, the man decides to ask for care for his valuable horse. The groom promises to fulfill the chamberlain's request and asks him not to worry about the animal. And the servant reports that in Nieta, they mix magic stones into horse feed, and the chamberlain's pet will be even healthier. Meanwhile, our heroine had already managed to sneak into the pen of the valuable horse unnoticed. While the chamberlain was making a series of requests to the groom, no one even thought about what Liliana was planning. At this point, the horse begins to rage and makes a loud noise. All the men turn their heads and look at the girl in amazement. And at this moment, a frightened Liliana wonders why this horse is not listening at all. The chamberlain is curious to find out who this stranger is, who is trying to steal his animal. With horror, Liliana realizes that she was unable to escape from the palace unnoticed. At this time, the chamberlain hears that this person is a princess, and the servant is already rushing to the girl to find out what she is doing here at such a late hour. Suddenly, the man realizes that the king's daughter has decided to run away from home. After such a loud revelation, Liliana begins to act decisively. She abruptly mounts her horse and mentally asks the chamberlain for forgiveness. The girl does not harbor any ill will towards him and steals the horse only because she wants to live. However, the man's speed is sufficient to reach the animal. After this, the chamberlain jumps on the horse and sits behind our heroine. He then says that this is a very valuable animal for him and that he cannot just let it go. Liliana looks into the man's eyes with great shock and tries to understand who he really is. And at this time, he explains that even a princess should not steal his horse. After all, this valuable animal belongs to the great empire and the emperor himself. These words hit our heroine like ice water and made her freeze in place. She begins to mentally analyze what was said and comes to a shocking conclusion. It turns out that the man next to her is that very Emperor Helio Carlo. After this, the man stops the horse and jumps back down to the ground. And how did Liliana manage to stumble upon the one person she was going to avoid? Now she sees with her own eyes the young emperor of the empire, Carlo, and the father of the main character. It is he who the girl will have to marry, following the original story. At this moment, Liliana notices with horror the emperor's gaze on her. The man can barely contain his smile at such a violent reaction. After this, he extends his hand to help the girl down. But the princess, in a state of shock, cannot figure out what the man wants from her. Then Carlo explains that the girl will not be able to sit on a horse her whole life. No matter how hardy his animal was, it was unlikely to be able to endure this for so long. Liliana's common sense prevails, and she decides to seek the emperor's help. However, the current situation is not at all in the girl's favor. The princess bows her head to the man and greets him with respect. She also apologizes for being rude during their first meeting. But Carlo is now only interested in the question of our princess's escape. The servant stands up for the girl and says that the girl just wanted to take a walk at night because she couldn't sleep from worry. However, the emperor understands that this version sounds like nonsense. After all, the princess decided to take a ride on his horse. But Carlo decides that such a meeting is destined for him by fate itself and asks to be taken to the girl's father. After some time, all 5 sisters meet the respected guest inside the palace. With them is King Nieta and the emperor sitting on the throne. Carlo tells the girl's father that he just saw something interesting. But before we talk about this, it's worth dealing with another matter. The emperor wants to know which princess the king is going to give as a hostage. He also recalls the agreement that after the end of the war, one of his daughters would become Carlo's wife. The king of Nieta explains that he was going to send his most beloved daughter. After this, the man points his finger at Princess Liliana. He praises the girl and describes her as very smart and beautiful. At this point, Carlo reveals that it was she who tried to escape from the palace and stumbled upon him. It becomes obvious that the princess did this in order to avoid marrying the emperor. The king tries to justify himself and is sure that there was a misunderstanding. After this, the emperor decides to get up from the throne and approaches the man. He explains that he gave the man too much freedom when he allowed him to choose the princess himself. But his future wife decided to run away and leave her homeland, just to avoid becoming the emperor's wife. Apparently, Carlo was too soft on the defeated nation, and he would have no objections if he had chosen his wife himself. It is obvious that the king's nonsense about his beloved daughter is complete nonsense. But since the king is sure that Liliana could not have done such a thing, Carlo puts away his sword. In fact, he doesn't care who becomes his wife, since he just needs a connection with the kingdom of Nieta. Initially, he intended to take the beloved daughter of the defeated king. But after recent events, his choice fell on a completely different person. No matter how hard Liliana tries to avoid her fate, she will not be able to change anything. All of Carlo's attention is now focused solely on our heroine. The emperor then announces that the king must make another agreement with him. If Liliana is truly his beloved daughter, then he must grant the right of inheritance of Nieta to the child born in their marriage. At this moment, everyone present begins to whisper in horror, and the king turned completely pale and even lost the power of speech for a moment. With a threatening look, the emperor asks whether his father really cannot take such a step. Gritting his teeth and his dignity, the king decides to agree to Carlo's terms. After this, the emperor suggests going ahead with the wedding as originally planned. He decides to speed things up and organize the ceremony in 3 days. Time flew by very quickly, and it was already the morning of the 3rd day. Liliana was shocked when she saw her carriage for the first time. It looks 100 times better than the one the late queen used. Sophia explains that this is exactly what they say. Like it's better to be the tail of a dragon than the head of a snake. She wouldn't have become Queen Liliana in her own house anyway, so it can be considered that her position has improved. Sitting in an overly heavy dress, our heroine listens to the maid's assumptions. Sophia believes that Carlo fell in love with Liliana at first sight. Obviously, such news comes as a genuine shock to our heroine. It cannot be that Emperor Carlo somehow made this clear. At this moment, the man himself appears. Hearing that they are talking about him, he speaks ironically about how girls spread gossip about him even before the wedding. Or maybe they are developing a plan so that Liliana can escape again. The princess tries to justify herself, but in the eyes of the emperor, she has already earned the reputation of a fugitive. Then Liliana explains that she thought she was well prepared for the escape. But in any case, she promises that she will not do anything like this again. And even if she had tried to escape, she would hardly have been able to survive alone. The girl lived her whole life as a princess, and no one would even hire her. It was obvious that she was destined to die of starvation while trying to survive in the forest with the help of berries. She doesn't know how to sew or clean at all, but she can cook a little on a gas stove. Our heroine decides to finally open up to the emperor. The princess explains that in reality, she is completely useless to him. This admission leaves the emperor truly perplexed. There is even an awkward pause between the characters, since no one knows what to do next in such cases. Then Carlo reports that Liliana is saying very strange things. After this, the girl decides to justify herself and explain the essence of her words. The princess tried to convey that she would be of no use as a hostage. Until it came to marriage, her father couldn't even remember his own daughter's name. Therefore, her departure from the kingdom will not pose any serious threat. Carlo is very surprised that the girl is so sincere with him. He pauses for a moment to digest everything she has said. The man then states that ultimately, it is up to him to decide who to marry and who not to. Moreover, if Liliana gives birth to his child, he will become the ruler of the empire, and then she will no longer be in the status of a useless princess. It is impossible to predict how the world will change in the future, so don't start with self-flagellation. Now our heroine is completely sure that she cannot convince the emperor. After this, Carlo leaves and promises the girl to meet him in his empire. The wheels of our heroine's carriage begin to turn, and the girls set off on their journey. At this point, Sophia explains that His Majesty definitely liked the lady, but Liliana clutches the hem of her dress and explains that this is not the case at all. After all, what is much worse for her is that she might please the emperor. In the original story, Liliana and Helio had 2 children. They lost their first child due to some accident during pregnancy. The second one was born when Liliana had not yet fully recovered, and because of this, she died after childbirth. Knowing the original story, our heroine does not want such a death for herself. She decides to make it so that the emperor doesn't even want to look at her. Meanwhile, Helio Carlo leads the princess's carriage on his prized horse. The man doesn't even suspect what kind of plan his future wife is developing. He then asks the knight if he has ever tried to raise a squirrel. When he was still a child, he saw such an animal at his cousin's. Out of curiosity, he treated the squirrel to nuts and cookies, but she couldn't fit everything in both cheeks. At one point, she just froze in place, and it was very cute. This is especially true when a squirrel tries to understand something with its tiny head. And while the knight is pondering the strange conversation, Carlo switches to something else. He thinks about Liliana, who still has a certain brave side. The man can't believe that the princess decided to say such a thing. After this, watching her will probably not be boring at all. The road to the empire was not short, and our heroine dozed off. Suddenly, the carriage shook violently, and Liliana woke up abruptly. She decides to ask Sophia what suddenly happened. The maid peers out the window and asks the princess to look at it too. It turns out that the crew has already arrived in the empire, where many people are meeting Carlo. Liliana gets out of the carriage and remembers that they stopped in a couple of towns along the way. Suddenly, she takes a careless step and twists her ankle. Our heroine begins to fall, but the emperor manages to catch her in time. Finding himself too close to the princess, he asks if she is all right. Liliana is embarrassed by the romantic atmosphere and abruptly turns away from Carlo. After this, something amazing and incredible will appear before her eyes. The girl sees before her a majestic palace, in comparison with which Nieta is just a tiny country. Liliana's father tried to raise the price of magic stones and even decided to go to war. At this moment, Carlo announces that the servants will take the girl to the Emerald Palace. It is not too big, and this is where the princess will have to stay. However, Carlo also adds that the girl should not feel any discomfort there. Entering the Emerald Palace, Liliana was amazed by its scale. At this moment, a servant approaches her and hands a tray to the future empress. It contains a letter that was sent directly from His Majesty. Our heroine takes the envelope in her hands and immediately unfolds it. In it, she reads a message in which Carlo warns her not to even think about escaping. He explains with a sneer that all the maids are also guards. But Liliana is confident that she has already gone very far, and only one method will be effective. Then, the girl goes into her room and looks at the interior in amazement. Meanwhile, Sophia can't get enough of admiring the views from the window. Suddenly, Liliana asks the maid to bring her some medicine. Sophia begins to worry about her mistress, who might have fallen ill. But the princess explains that this is not entirely true, and asks the maid to come closer. Since the request is very delicate, it is important that no one hears about it. Liliana informs her that Sophia must bring her medication that prevents conception of children, but the maid flatly refuses to fulfill such a terrible request. The princess begins to persuade the girl and explains that she does not want children at all. Then Sophia adds that such drugs are very difficult to obtain, but even if you manage to buy them on the black market, it is unknown what will actually be inside. It is likely that because of them, the princess will become ill with something terrible. In this case, she faces a choice between death after childbirth or poisoning with questionable drugs. The second option is definitely closer to the girl, and she continues to persuade the maid. However, Sophia flatly refuses this request and explains that the lady will have much more fun with the child. Moreover, the king of Nieta agreed to transfer the right of inheritance to Liliana. In this way, no disputes regarding the throne in the empire will arise. On the same day, the first night that Liliana will spend in her new home begins. But all this time, our heroine thinks only about the original story. As a spirit master, Liliana stood out and had to earn the emperor's favor. Before that, the palace treated her as an unnecessary burden. If you think about it, this girl reminds our heroine of herself in her youth. After all, she also had to feel lonely in the big world. At this moment, the girl decides to focus and stop thinking about her past life. Now, it's important for her to somehow get the drugs or make sure the emperor doesn't pay attention to her. The next day, Liliana woke up with full confidence to put her plan into action. But already at breakfast, she was informed that the Dowager Empress wanted to see her. Yesterday, she decided to give the girl a chance to rest and rescheduled the meeting for today. Liliana really hopes that she won't have to visit her future mother-in-law every day. The maid calms the girl down and explains that the Empress does not need such fuss and that this meeting is only for greeting. After careful preparation and choosing of the outfit, the princess is still very nervous. However, she is greatly frightened by the path she follows behind the maid. After all, the path runs through the forest, although the empress should live in the palace. But the maid explains that this is a small garden that Her Majesty planted out of her love for nature. Thinking that everything in Carlo's empire is truly enormous, Liliana reaches the palace. The maid opens the door and introduces the guest to the empress. An incredibly beautiful woman asks Liliana to come inside. Our heroine bows to the empress and says that such a meeting is a great honor for her. After this, the woman asks her guest to sit down next to her. Liliana finally sees with her own eyes what the Dowager Empress looks like. When she looks at her, she sees a clear resemblance to Helio Carlo. Suddenly, the Empress asks if it was difficult for the girl to travel all the way from the distant kingdom. Our heroine replies that Helio was kind to her, and it is a great honor for her to be in the empire. At this point, the woman reveals that she too left her homeland, having been brought here as a bride. Liliana didn't even know that the Empress was a political hostage. She also became part of the imperial family at a young age and missed her home country. Her homeland was a peaceful place, full of sunshine and lush vegetation, and although the woman's body ended up in Carlo's empire, her heart always dreamed of home. She didn't even care about the young emperor after she gave birth to him. After all, the empress was constantly in a state of melancholy, and because of this, the boy grew up without ever knowing a mother's love. Liliana was shocked by such frankness from her future mother-in-law. But at this point, the woman apologizes for only talking about herself. She just wanted to say that if the emperor seemed too cold, then Liliana should understand him. In the original, the relationship between Helio and his mother was not very warm, and perhaps the woman regrets her actions. And the widow reports that she heard that the young people no longer have casual conversations. Liliana is outraged by such rumors, since her conversation with Helio is more like that of prey in front of a predator. At this point, the empress invites the girl to drink tea together sometimes. Our heroine happily agrees, although they say that it is often better not to meet with your mother-in-law, and the empress also asks to tell her something interesting about Helio. At this moment, the voice of servants is heard, announcing the arrival of the emperor. The man stops in his mother's room and watches what is happening with curiosity. The woman continues to calmly drink her tea, and Liliana jumps up from her chair in surprise. The emperor says that he has come to pay his respects to his mother, but the princess's appearance surprised him. Helio did not expect that the empress would be interested in his future wife. Liliana feels like the atmosphere has become very cold because of the relationship between mother and son. She decides to leave them alone and not interfere with the cold conversation. The girl leaves and Helio and his mother watch her go. The man then wonders why his mother would suddenly pay attention to government affairs or his work. The empress explains that she was thinking of starting to do this, but these words only make Helio grin maliciously. Most likely, it's simply that Liliana is the same kind of hostage that his mother once was. These words pierce the empress's heart like a sharp blade, but Helio just demonstratively turns away and suggests that his mother do what she wants. In any case, she still won't be able to return to her homeland. The empress could barely hold back her tears from such cruel words. Meanwhile, Liliana runs as fast as she can away from this place. She could not tolerate such coldness in the communication between her son and mother for long. Suddenly, Liliana herself does not notice how an obstacle appears in front of her. The princess runs into a stranger with fiery red curls. Our heroine clutches her bruised nose and asks the girl for forgiveness. At this moment, the atmosphere around finally ceases to be warm. The injured empress begins to loudly express her indignation at the girl who dared to knock her down. After this incident, Liliana gets back on her feet and apologizes once again to the injured party. However, the girl's words about her being an empress do not give our heroine any peace. At this moment, Liliana's maid informs her of the stranger's status. This is the honorable daughter of the duchy, Lady Visti Gaviel, who is a candidate for empress. Our heroine begins to remember this character in the original. In the novel, only one other person was mentioned as the empress, and that was Visti Gaviel. She was a villain who harassed the original protagonist, and it was this girl who was the main culprit in the termination of the first pregnancy. However, Liliana doubts that Visti has already been officially recognized as empress, but even in this case, the girl behaves as if she is the rightful mistress. Visti repeats her question threateningly and demands that Liliana identify herself. The girl behaves very arrogantly and it is completely unpleasant to be around her. While our heroine endures this disrespectful treatment, her maid introduces Liliana to Lady Vista. Hearing the name of the kingdom the girl comes from, the villainess begins to mock. It turns out that she was just knocked down by the princess from the ruined kingdom. Liliana restrains herself from being rude to the candidate for empress, who occupies a higher position. Our heroine decides to apologize to her again and explains that she simply wasn't looking where she was going. And if Visti was looking for His Majesty, then he is now in the palace of the Dowager Empress. But the girl demonstratively announces that she came to look at the Emerald Palace. She was curious to see the mediocre house that the emperor gave to his future wife. Liliana explains that she is very grateful to His Majesty for the gift, and Visti considered such an answer as insolence. Our heroine even mentally expresses outrage at the unfounded accusations, and Visti continues to humiliate the girl, calling her kingdom small and insignificant. It was too much for the emperor to take a princess who had nothing to her name as a hostage, and so Liliana stands in front of this villain and tries to understand what she is getting at. But it turns out that she simply doesn't like that the emperor decided to make her his wife. In this way, Visti wants to show the girl her place, and Liliana sighs heavily. At that moment, a loud slap from a blow is heard in the corridor. Liliana clutches her cheek, which has turned red from Visti's palm. The candidate for empress was angered by the fact that our heroine dared to sigh next to her. She says that Liliana is nobody here, and such a parasite cannot behave like an empress. At this moment, a strong rage flares up in our heroine's eyes. She then swings her hand and aims a punch towards Visti. The impudent empress is so taken by surprise that she doesn't even have time to react. But Liliana stops in time, and the villain gets off with just a slight fright. After this, the girl calmly lowers her hand, without causing the slightest harm to Visti. With a coldness in her voice, Liliana also adds that she tried to kill a fly. She then bows to an enraged Visti and tells her that it is time for her to go. The maids follow our heroine, and the villainess watches her go. Undoubtedly, this meeting left indescribable anger in the heart of the villainess. After some time, Sophia panics because of her mistress's red face. She even suggested that it was the Dowager Empress who hit the princess. But Liliana denies this and asks Sophia to take all the maids away so they can rest in silence. She assures the maid that she is fine, although her cheek actually hurts a lot. Our heroine tries to relieve the pain with ice and thinks that it would be worthwhile to return the favor to Visti. However, she is glad that she did not respond to the candidate for empress with the same slap. Nothing good would have come of it if she had hit someone higher in status than herself. Although Liliana does not want to give birth, she also does not want to be expelled from the palace. Besides, she had long been accustomed to this kind of treatment, thanks to the royal sisters, so another person trying to put her in her place is something commonplace. At the same time, the emperor receives information that Liliana was slapped. One of the maids tells His Majesty about what happened in the corridor of the Emerald Palace. This situation makes the man seriously think about what is happening. After some time, Liliana wakes up from bright rays of light falling on her bed. She discovers that there is no one in the room, and it is unknown how long her sleep lasted. Our heroine remembers that she asked Sophia not to disturb her. Fortunately, the swelling on my face went away, as they were able to deal with it quickly. While Liliana was examining the redness on her face, someone knocked on the door. The girl immediately runs to the entrance, thinking that Sophia has arrived. She opens the door and is surprised to find Helio standing on the threshold. Liliana stands in her pajamas and is lost at the sight of the emperor, and the man understands from the girl's appearance that she has just woken up. He heard that the princess had not left her room since early morning. Liliana explains that she simply felt unwell. However, the girl assures the emperor that she is already feeling better. But the attentive Helio immediately notices a red mark on her cheek, and our heroine can't understand why he's staring at her like that. At the same time, the girl decides to ask what brought the emperor to her room. Helio replies ironically that he doesn't need a reason for his visit. After all, he entered his wife's room, and not some stranger's. And if there is only one good reason why the emperor can come to his wife's chambers. At that moment, a million thoughts start running through her head. Liliana even imagines herself in the courtroom. There, she gathers the defense and prosecution to say something about the matter. The defense takes the floor first and reports that the emperor simply decided to inspect the room. Since he had provided Liliana with housing, he came to make sure that everything was in order. But the prosecution protests that it is outrageous to visit a woman's room at such an hour. Apparently, Helio came to the princess for what a husband and wife usually do together. After the versions are put forward, a lively debate begins between the prosecution and the defense. And at this moment, Liliana's face looks like a red tomato. Helio looks closely at the girl and tries to understand what she was thinking. He again notices the slap mark on her face and her sad face. All this evokes compassion in the emperor, and he applies his hand to our heroine's sore spot. What Liliana certainly didn't expect was Helio's touch. Realizing what was happening, the girl suddenly jumped back and screamed. The emperor decides to get out of bed, and Liliana still doesn't understand what he wants. And the man comes up to the girl again and touches her face. He tries to tell her in a calm voice what this princess really needs. But, sensing something is wrong, Liliana reminds the emperor that they are still not married. This situation clearly amuses the man, who had completely different plans. He starts laughing loudly after he understands the girl's thoughts. He then pokes Liliana in the reddened cheek, and she cries out in pain. Helio explains that the princess is much more interesting than she seems, and in fact, he came to ask if someone had done something to his future wife. Realizing that they are talking about her cheek, Liliana decides to lie and says that she simply fell. However, for the emperor, such an excuse seems like complete nonsense, especially since he knows about the slap in the face from Visti. But for Liliana, much in this situation remains unclear. She thought Lady Gavial would make a big deal out of the situation. After thinking for a while, the emperor decides to ask the princess directly. He heard that Lady Gavial was in the palace today, and it was probably she who hit the girl. And the maids say she could be the next empress. At this point, Liliana decides to completely agree, since there is no point in denying it anymore. She also explains that it was for this reason that she endured the humiliation. At the same time, Liliana is going to do this now and in the future. The emperor is very surprised by this decision and does not understand why the princess has set herself such a goal. Is it really necessary to endure humiliation when she is provoked? And if the two had started a fight, it would have ended worse for Liliana. But since the princess has already decided everything, the emperor is ready to take her under his protection. Because of this, she will no longer have to endure bullying and ridicule. After this unusual conversation, Helio says goodbye to the girl and leaves. Finally, he suggests waiting for the coronation ceremony and discussing what Liliana thought so absurdly about today. At first, Liliana did not understand his words, but then the full meaning of the sensitive topic finally dawned on her. At the same time, Helio can't stop thinking about how mysteriously the princess is behaving. Previously, she spoke out very boldly and was not afraid to speak to someone's face, and now she's all depressed, just because Gaviel hit her. The emperor takes a few more steps forward and suddenly stops. He understands that the problem is not at all that the girl is depressed. Most likely, Liliana simply did not expect to receive protection from him. This guest does not please Helio at all and makes him think. After some time, our heroine goes down to the dining room to have breakfast. But instead of eating, the princess just moves her spoon around her plate. Sophia notices the strange behavior of the lady, and it seems to her that Liliana does not like the food. However, the girl tries to assure the maid that this is not the case at all. Liliana wonders in her mind if anyone else can hear this noise. All this time, the girl is haunted by the strange sound of a woman crying in the dining room. Sophia doesn't notice anything at all, and our heroine thinks that this may be due to fatigue. But Liliana can't stand this crying any longer and gets up from the table, and she tells the maid that she urgently needs to go to the restroom. After this, the princess goes down the corridor of the palace in search of the mysterious cry. Although perhaps she also misheard all of this, because she was extremely tired. Suddenly, Liliana hears the mysterious crying near her again. Nearby, she sees a door, behind which that same noise is heard. Wherever you looked, the sound of crying was definitely coming from behind that wall. But before the mysterious door, all sorts of fears begin to creep into your head. Yet she decides to overcome her fear of ghosts and find out what is in this room. Our heroine takes hold of the handle and carefully opens the door. Inside, she encounters a huge cloud of dust that makes it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, someone's surprised voice addresses the girl. Out of the corner of her eye, Liliana notices a small creature with wings. The fairy-like girl can't believe that anyone can hear her. She looks with a fascinated gaze at the man who first noticed her. Not only can the girl hear her, but she can also see her. All this time, our heroine cannot even move from surprise. She is shocked to meet an elemental in person. The first requirement to become a spirit master is the ability to see elemental beings. In the novel, Lilith was a prominent spirit master who formed a contract with two elementals at an early age. Thinking about this, our heroine remembered that Helio did not have such abilities. If it is genetic, then most likely it was passed on to the daughter from Liliana. At this time, the spirit asks the girl to try to touch her. She urges our heroine to try to do this as soon as possible. Liliana carefully extends her hand and points it towards the creature. After this, the elemental gets the opportunity to sit on the girl's palm. The fairy can't believe that someone could touch her. Has she finally met a man with the makings of a spirit master? However, the chain on her leg does not allow the little fairy to move freely. A heavy burden pulls the spirit down and leaves it chained to one place. The fairy tells Liliana that these shackles are preventing her from flying away. Then our heroine decides to look for something that can break this chain. However, the elemental spirit explains that this cannot be broken with simple tools. After all, she feels a special spiritual power in this object. Only a powerful spirit master or elemental who created the shackles can destroy them. At this moment, a brilliant idea comes to the little creature's mind. She offers Liliana to learn the art of spiritual magic. After all, she has a huge premonition that the girl will be able to break these shackles. However, our heroine knows nothing about how to become a spirit master. But the fairy explains that there is no other person for this role, and there cannot be. Moreover, if she makes a contract with an elemental, she will be able to use its power. And the fairy has the power of the wind and can control it as she wants. If you study well with such strength, you can even fly. Liliana was very interested in the ability that the spirit promised her. This opportunity will definitely be useful to our heroine in this world. After this, the girl takes the weight with the chain in her hand and agrees to help the spirit. They decide to get to know each other better and tell each other their names. The fairy is very glad to meet you and says that her name is Choo Choo. After some time, the day comes when the wedding of the emperor and the princess is to take place. Since early morning, Liliana's maid has been preparing her mistress for the celebration and reminds her that it is time for her to go. Our heroine gets up from her chair and says that she understands everything. At the same time, the girl's face is completely blank before the event, which she is not at all happy about. And Sophia can't stop admiring the bride's extraordinary beauty. At this time, Choo Choo is in her room, enjoying delicious cookies. She decides to ask the girl where she's going in such a beautiful outfit. However, Liliana asks not to talk to her in the presence of other people. But Choo Choo explains that no one except the girl can hear or see her. And at this time, Sophia notices that the lady is too absent-minded. Liliana rushes to reassure her that she is okay. In this case, the maid decides to hurry the princess, since today is a very important day. After all, the ceremony of appointing the princess as wife is about to begin. On this day, everything was prepared in the palace garden for the upcoming wedding. The first person to wait for the emperor's future wife was the dowager empress. Liliana greets Mother Helio and bows to her. At this moment, the empress's maid presents the girl with a gift box. In it, our heroine discovers a crown of incredible beauty. Liliana bows her head, and the maids put the empress's attribute on her. And Mother Helio says that it must be strange to take the position of someone's wife without a real wedding. But at first, Liliana didn't even understand what exactly the woman meant. Then Helio's mother explains that she heard that the girl liked her garden. Usually, the ceremony is held in a different location, so Liliana may consider this a gesture of goodwill. Our heroine thanks him for preparing the ceremony in her garden, and at that moment, the servants announce the arrival of His Majesty. However, no one expected to see Helio in the garden at this time. The man had thoroughly prepared for the wedding and was dressed in a white suit. The emperor had been handsome before, but Liliana had never seen him in such a stunning form. A man approaches his bride and informs her that he is a little late. He couldn't decide what gift to choose for the appointment ceremony. After this, Helio extends his hand and announces that he has decided to give himself. After a short time, the priest begins to conduct the wedding ceremony. He reads a speech and announces that from today, the emperor will marry the princess of the kingdom of Nieta. He also vows to cherish and protect her under any circumstances, and the wedding ceremony today is proof of this vow. Immediately after the appointment, the emperor invites his wife to go to the Emerald Palace. Our heroine is very scared that Helio is going to accompany her. But the man explains that there is nothing wrong with the emperor escorting his wife to the palace. However, for Liliana, this gesture seems very strange and unthinkable. She heard that it was absolutely impossible for the emperor to attend the appointment ceremony in person. This circumstance does not give our heroine peace and makes her worry. The nobles will surely spread rumors about what happened today. And in a couple of days, everyone in Carlo's empire will know what happened. People will begin to think that the emperor values Empress Liliana. The girl immediately remembers the moment where the man promises to take her under his protection. It looks like Helio really does intend to keep his oath. The man notices the girl's thoughtfulness and decides to ask what she is so diligently thinking about next to him. At this moment, Liliana is about to speak her decision out loud. She informs the emperor that she will allow him to accompany her today. The moment when she was slapped flashes through our heroine's mind. After this incident, the girl has no reason to refuse the emperor's offer of protection. Liliana extends her hand to him and is ready to trust her husband. But suddenly, she remembers something and asks the emperor to wait a little. Before leaving, our heroine decides to turn to the Dowager Empress. She thanks the woman for her efforts and considers it a great honor. The Empress is very pleased and advises the girl to have a good rest. Suddenly, Helio grabs his wife by the hand and pulls her towards him. Liliana is torn between two fires and feels how the atmosphere has become gloomy. In the end, she only has time to thank the Empress once again. After this, Helio heads towards the Emerald Castle and drags his wife along with him. Liliana feels a lot of pain and asks the Emperor not to pull her so hard. At this moment, Helio notices that he really had squeezed the girl's hand too hard. He lets Liliana go, and she can finally rest freely. The man apologizes and says that he simply didn't think about what was causing her pain. However, our heroine believes that Helio is definitely lying to her. She doesn't believe that the Emperor doesn't know how to properly hold a woman's hand. Helio is even outraged by the fact that his wife decided that he has a lot of experience holding women's hands. But in any case, he promises that he will try to improve. Liliana didn't expect that the Emperor would turn out to be anything but a womanizer. Even less did she expect that he would listen to others. After this, the man asks how his wife is living in the Emerald Palace, and our heroine replies that she feels very good in this house, but Lady Gavielle doesn't like her very much. At the same time, Liliana really enjoys watching the garden from the windows of the Emerald Palace. In the future, she even plans to plant an apple tree and eat its fruit. At that moment, Helio looked at his wife with distrust. He decides to ask the girl if she will share these apples with him. After this question, a smile finally appears on Liliana's face. The girl starts laughing and promises to definitely share the apples with her husband. At this moment, the Emperor looks at Liliana in amazement. Then, he pokes her in the forehead and reminds her that everything here already belongs to him. Therefore, the girl has no choice but to share these apples with him. After this, our heroine grabs her forehead and thinks about something. The couple find themselves at the entrance doors to the palace, and the Emperor announces his visit in the evening. Liliana is confused and wonders why he is coming. Helio explains that after the appointment ceremony, it is time to strengthen the marriage. Immediately after this, our heroine bursts into her room and turns to Choo-Choo. The girl says that today they must urgently begin implementing the plan. That same evening, a servant comes to the Emperor's office with an important message. He conveys to Helio the words of the Empress consort that she is already ready. The man finishes his business and gets ready to go to Liliana. All the time on the road, he thinks about how he needs to have an heir as soon as possible. However, he remembers the reaction of the girl, who is not at all ready for intimacy. That is why he has endured all this time and will continue to do so. Perhaps today the Emperor will simply tease his wife. Having finished thinking about this, Helio approaches Liliana's room. The man knocks carefully on the door and then goes inside. However, what he sees just doesn't fit into his head. Liliana stands on the edge of the balcony and prepares to jump off it. Helio tries to stop his wife and shouts that it is dangerous, but our heroine only silently turns to her husband. Then she takes a step that leads her into a deep abyss. Liliana closes her eyes and flies off the balcony at great speed. Helio doesn't manage to catch her and only watches her fall in horror. He could never have imagined that this girl would decide to commit suicide. Liliana ends up on the ground and hears Choo-Choo apologizing to her. Obviously, everything didn't go according to plan and there wasn't enough spirit. Through her blurred vision, Liliana sees how the Emperor is worried about her. She closes her eyes and is surprised to realize that someone is worried about her. Long ago, in the kingdom of Nieta, a princess with pink hair was born. She was very sweet, but no one except her mother was happy about her birth. Mother was an ordinary maid and had no relation to the nobility. The princess, who was born by chance, drank tea that tasted like plain water and was not sad. And all this because she loved her little world, and her mother was kind to her. But this happiness did not last long and was shattered in an instant. Then the other sisters began to bully the girl and even hit her. Forgotten by the king, this girl never had a voice. Everyone in the kingdom pointed out to the unfortunate woman her place, which was below the baseboard. The children considered her a dirty and disgusting creature and humiliated her in every possible way. The princesses even said that Liliana's mother was simply lying and had given birth to another man's child. Only such words made the girl stand up for herself and fight back. However, even at these moments, she stopped with trembling hands. Liliana understood that she shouldn't beat her sisters for humiliating her. After all, in that case, her mother will be punished, and it won't make things any easier for either of them. When the girl was being flogged for threatening Priscilla, she realized something. Then she was in pain, not at all, from the blows that inflicted wounds on her. She felt more pain from the sound of her mother crying and not being able to do anything. All this time the girl endured and only wanted her mother not to cry. For this reason, she promised herself to be more patient and survive in the harsh world. Thus, the young girl grew into a beautiful princess with pink hair. After some time, our heroine finally opens her eyes after the fall. Sophia makes a loud noise because the lady has finally woken up. It turns out that through her sleep all this time, she heard her maid crying. Sophia was very worried about her owner when she fell from a great height. Liliana recalls that the force of the wind did help soften her fall, and she remembers Choo-Choo with horror. The elemental is nowhere to be found, and it seems that our heroine is already beginning to hear crying outside. The girl's head is filled with the most macabre scenarios of where Chucha disappeared to, and Sophia at this time reports that the emperor was very angry about what happened. This is great news for the new empress, as now the man's interest in her may wane. Suddenly, there is a knock outside the room, and Liliana allows entry. The maid comes to the entrance and opens the door for the guest. At this moment, Liliana hears the announcement that the emperor has arrived at the palace. The man stops near the door and says that the girl looks pretty good. Liliana greets His Majesty and asks for forgiveness for not being able to do so properly due to weakness. Helio sits down on the bed next to his wife and asks how she is feeling, and Liliana, at that moment, realizes that the man arrived to her as soon as she opened her eyes. Suddenly, the emperor decides to lean towards the girl, and this makes her nervous. Our heroine blushes with embarrassment and is ready to pray that Helio will keep his distance. At this point, the man reports that he has been thinking a lot about Liliana, and in particular, about why she so strongly doesn't want to be with him. Liliana can't think of anything better than to pretend that she doesn't understand anything. After this, Helio decides to assume that the incident with his wife was not accidental. But our heroine denies this thought and says that everything happened unpredictably. However, the emperor saw with his own eyes that the girl did it on purpose. He wonders why Liliana did this, and whether he is really that scary to her. But after thinking a little, the emperor comes to the conclusion that this cannot be. After all, he understands his situation, and no one has ever complained about his appearance. In this case, Helio decides that the whole problem lies in his difficult character. However, judging by the confident conversations with him, this is also not a reason for Liliana. After all, other people are simply trying to avoid the emperor for various reasons. Then, our heroine says that before she only communicated with her mother and Sophia, she also had to maintain contact with her sisters, who disliked her. And for the first time, a man talks to her and tries to flirt. In this case, the emperor completely ceases to understand what could be the reason for the girl's strange behavior. Helio was in a hurry to unite the families in order to give Liliana power. After these words, our heroine remembers that the emperor should have been angry with her. But based on this conversation, he is genuinely interested in her feelings. All this makes Liliana confess her sincere feelings. Despite her fear of revealing herself, she still decides to answer the emperor's question. Having gathered her courage, the girl tells Helio about her fears. She starts by saying that she doesn't need the power he talks about at all. All our heroine dreams of is a calm and peaceful life. and Helio explains that this is impossible in the imperial palace. Then, Liliana imagines how things will develop if she has a child. Without sufficient power, the heir will face many dangers, and if a child is hit by a noble person, then Liliana can only ask him to endure it. And if he dies, the girl will grieve alone. After growing up, when the time comes for marriage, the child will be sold altogether. Without enough power, our heroine won't be able to influence this in any way. Although she can endure humiliation herself, she does not want such a fate for her child. This revelation greatly shocks the emperor and makes him think. What was said penetrated his heart so deeply that his fist clenched with unpleasant feelings. Helio remembers a moment from his childhood when he ran to meet his mother. He was so happy to see her after a long separation that he could not contain his emotions. However, the mother pretended that she simply did not notice her child. At that moment, something finally collapsed in the heart of the future emperor. It is not surprising that being ignored by his mother became a huge pain for him. At the same time, the woman was immersed only in her own thoughts and problems and did not notice the boy. Immersed in his memories, Helio felt that pain all over again. From his appearance, Liliana guesses that the emperor has encountered something similar, but he drops this topic and asks if he understood correctly that the girl does not want an heir. Our heroine is very glad that Helio understood her thought and agrees with his assumption. She even adds that she doesn't want to live as peacefully as if she were already dead. The man pokes his finger into her cheek and tells her that she is surprisingly open in front of the emperor. Since the emperor understands her feelings, he suggests that she focus on her recovery for now. Finally, Liliana decides to clarify whether Helio is really not angry with her. But the man turns to his wife with a smile and replies that he doesn't even understand what she means. And should he be angry because of her refusal to share the emperor's bed or her unwillingness to have an heir? To close this topic, Helio explains that he is not angry at Liliana specifically. If he were looking for someone to get off on, a girl would not be the first candidate. After this, the man leaves and asks the girl not to do anything reckless. Our heroine is left alone and tries to understand what it all was. Could it be that the emperor was really worried about her all this time? At this moment, Sophia runs up to the girl and scolds her for speaking to the emperor like that. Liliana apologizes to the maid, and she thinks for a moment. Sophia reports that she has made a decision regarding the hostess's request. The maid is referring to the anti-pregnancy drugs that she agrees to get for her. Enough time has passed since that day for Liliana to come to her senses. While the girl was recovering her health, the emperor sent her letters. After that conversation, he decided not to visit her in person and occasionally sent gifts. At first, it was magnificent jewelry and then dresses. But what made Liliana laugh the most was when Helio decided to give her a sword. To live in peace for a little while longer, our heroine decides to tell her husband that she hasn't fully recovered yet. After this, she puts the message in an envelope and asks the servant to deliver it to His Majesty. At this point, Chuchu curiously asks what Liliana wrote there. Secretly, the girl managed to save the elemental and bring her back to the house. At the same time, our heroine notices that the weather is wonderful outside, and it would be nice to go for a walk. Sophia allows them to go out only as far as the palace gates, and the girls find themselves in a beautiful garden. Liliana sits down on a bench to enjoy the picturesque scenery. In front of her lies a beautiful dense forest and a lake shimmering in the rays of the sun. Our heroine didn't forget about Chuchu, whom she also took with her on a walk. It would seem that this is exactly the kind of life our heroine should have dreamed about. But suddenly, Chucha notices that someone from the people is walking in their direction. She tells Liliana about this and points her finger in the right direction. The girl peers ahead and discovers the emperor there. However, she doesn't understand where he could have appeared from so suddenly. After the couple's eyes meet, Liliana realizes that her plan has failed. After all, she had just written him a message saying that she had not yet recovered. In a panic, she even decides that it would be a good idea to just run away from there. Everything could have been much better if the girl had just stayed in her room. Suddenly, the atmosphere for Helio begins to get quite tense. At the same second, the emperor turns sharply and walks in the opposite direction. The Dowager Empress, who has just arrived, explains that her son left because of her. Unexpectedly hearing the woman's voice, Liliana almost turned gray with fright. After all, our heroine did not expect such a sudden appearance of Mother Helio. The woman sits down next to her daughter-in-law and notices that she is already feeling much better. She then explains that she has a lot to thank our heroine for. And while Chucha quietly hides from the uninvited guest, the Empress is glad that Liliana has become friends with her son. But the girl explains that His Majesty was simply being kind to someone unworthy like her. However, Mother Helio reports that her child is not one of those who feels pity for people. Despite the frank conversation, Liliana decides not to relax with this woman, so she says she doesn't quite understand what is being discussed. But the Dowager Empress adds that it was because of her that her son became so callous. After all, earlier this child tried to feel sorry for his mother and support her, and in response, I received only coldness and complete disregard instead of love. The Dowager Empress has already spoken about how she became a hostage from another country. She, like no one else, understands Liliana, who was also taken to this palace and made the emperor's wife. Liliana says she remembers the story and how the woman wanted to go home. Eventually, she became so melancholy that she began to fade away with each passing day. The late emperor advised his wife to have an heir. If she does this, he promises to give her freedom and return her to her homeland. Then the young princess believed these words and found hope. Liliana herself can guess what happened in this family next. When Helio was born, the late emperor asked to wait until the child was fed with milk. But Helio was an unusual child and demonstrated hidden talents. To say that he was very capable would be to say nothing about him. The late emperor and other people observed his talents. Everyone in the palace could see that Helio was a danger to the other heirs. And over time, the emperor wanted the boy to help him in his role as crown prince. For this, Helio also needed his mother, who could no longer return to her homeland. Liliana sadly realizes that early marriages in this era do not appeal to her at all. Surely, at 19 years old, the Dowager Empress was confused and frightened. And at this moment, the woman adds that youth does not justify the mistakes made. At that time, she was very afraid of her husband and did not realize that the child needed a mother. The Dowager Empress recalls one day and the gloomy walls of the palace corridor. Little Helio lay in his bed and was very ill. His mother approached the room and only heard her son calling her from inside. But she did not dare to take hold of the handle and open the door to the sick child. The woman stood outside the room without even going inside. Thinking about it now, she realizes that she has committed great revenge against the deceased emperor. And at what point did she and her son begin to treat each other as invisible? When he returned from the battlefield, he greeted his mother only at the palace gates. And one day, Helio started a rebellion and seized the throne that belonged to his father. Then, he told his mother that now she would never be able to return to her homeland. When the woman heard this, she realized that everything had come back to her like a boomerang. And now her son Helio was filled with anger, just like she was. After this, the Dowager Empress asks if Liliana understands why she is telling her this. Our heroine realizes that this is not just advice that the woman decided to share. She clearly wants something from the girl, and then she decides to sit on her lap. Liliana explains that she does not consider the woman to be entirely to blame for everything. And anyway, this is too complicated a question for someone insignificant like her. Therefore, the girl asks not to continue this conversation any further, and the Dowager Empress realizes that the king of Nita was a cruel man and abandoned his daughter. The woman understands her daughter-in-law's feelings and is not going to ask much from her. After such a heartfelt conversation, Liliana decides to say goodbye to the emperor's mother. Now our heroine can calmly return to her quiet room. Meanwhile, the Dowager Empress does not take her eyes off her daughter-in-law and is thinking mysteriously about something. If Liliana had chosen the culprit, the late emperor would have received the most severe punishment. But if you look at it this way, Helio had to bear the retribution of the Dowager Empress alone. And yet, if you have to choose a side, the girl is more inclined towards the Empress. At this time, Chuchu begins to become very indignant because Liliana is avoiding that person. She is sure that the girl was simply attracted to her pretty face. But our heroine can't say anything to Chuchu or make any choice. And after a couple of days, Liliana decided to focus on honing her spiritual skills. However, a knock at the door interrupted her training and forced her to stop. After this, Liliana gives permission to enter and thinks that she has gradually managed to grasp the essence of magic. At that moment, the servant reports that the Dowager Empress personally prepared and sent food to the emperor. Our heroine really likes the fact that the mother is trying to improve her relationship with her son. However, while Chucha is gorging himself on cookies, the servant adds that Helio has thrown out all the food. This news makes our heroine very worried about this state of affairs. Of course, on the one hand, one can understand Helio's actions and his rejection of his mother. But is it worth taking such extreme measures without thinking about public opinion? Although this no longer matters, since Liliana refused the Dowager Empress's offer. As the maid heads for the exit, our heroine tries to understand why Helio threw out the food. Choo-Choo decides to assume that the Emperor likes the girl, and this makes Liliana scream. The maid immediately turns around at the cry, as she has not yet managed to leave the room. Our heroine felt awkward, because at this rate, the maids would think she was strange. After all, no one even has any idea that the Emperor's wife is actually communicating with an elemental. That's why, after this incident, Liliana asks Choo-Choo not to talk to her when there are people around. Finally, the room is at our heroine's disposal, and she decides to continue training. She was interrupted right in the middle of her lesson, and now she has to start all over again. Liliana concentrates and imagines herself being entangled in snakes. After this, many glowing lines form around her body. Spiritual magic begins to work, and the girl feels that there is very little time left, and Choo-Choo is anxiously awaiting the moment when she will be able to free herself from her shackles. At this moment, Liliana finishes her training, and the spiritual being praises her for her excellent result. Now they are both confident that the girl will do even better next time. Liliana has already grasped the essence, and all that remains is to focus on increasing her strength. However, on the same day, our heroine receives a strange request from the Emperor. As a legal spouse, the man asks the girl for permission to sleep with her. It turns out that one elderly raccoon won't leave Helio alone and needs to escape somewhere. Now, Liliana understands that in this way, the Emperor is trying to hide from his mother. The man promises that he will not lay a finger on his wife without her permission. Resting his feet on the girl's shoes under the table, Helio reports that she has never met such an observant Emperor. Liliana immediately becomes embarrassed and asks her husband to stop doing this. Her cheeks immediately turn red, and her gaze becomes completely focused on the man. Liliana can't stop admiring the Emperor's beauty when he smiles. The girl is even sure that no sacred painting can be as beautiful as it is. Liliana's hands reach out to the man who fascinates her so much. But at that moment, our heroine stops and throws these thoughts out of her head. This strange behavior does not go unnoticed by the Emperor, who is perplexed. After this, he puts his cup of drink on the table and decides to sort out the situation. Helio gets up from his seat and appears behind our heroine. He slowly leans towards the Empress, and she feels a strong emotion. Right now, the man is so close that it makes you feel uneasy. And at that moment, Helio declares that in this dress, Liliana looks like a chicken. At first, our heroine doesn't even understand why the Emperor decided to joke like that. After all, he himself sent her this dress as a gift, and it took a lot of effort to fit into it. However, Helio is now more interested in why. At the moment of their conversation, the girl suddenly shouted the word no. He is sure that his wife thought of something that made her embarrassed, but Liliana tries in every way to avoid answering and says that she will prepare a separate room for Helio. However, the Emperor insists on sleeping with the girl in the same bed. Otherwise, rumors will spread that the Empress kicked her husband out. But Liliana doesn't care at all how she will look in history. But she clearly imagines what rumors will spread tomorrow after their overnight stay. And yet, it is unlikely that the ruler will break his word, that he will not lay a finger on the girl. But Helio's humorous hints don't allow our heroine to relax calmly next to him. For now, the Emperor asks the girl not to worry about anything and to go to bed. As night falls, the spouses finally find themselves in the same bed. Liliana tries to remain still and can't fall asleep because of anxiety. At this moment, she decides to sincerely thank His Majesty. The girl was very pleased that the man accepted her strange stubbornness. Helio realizes that she has thought of something stupid again and advises her to just sleep. But if she wants something else, he will gladly fulfill her wish. After this warm conversation, our heroine falls into a deep sleep. And Helio finds it strange that someone so tiny can shrink even more. Of course, he needed an heir, and dragging a hostage here wasn't that difficult. But if he begins to act by force, he will certainly be hated. Helio slowly covers Liliana with a blanket and decides that this should no longer bother him. And yet, for some reason, he doesn't want the girl to treat him like that. After this, the man decides to let go of the blanket and find another way to achieve his goal. For example, a great option would be to simply make Liliana fall in love with you. Our heroine can no longer close her eyes due to the resulting awkwardness. The girl does not understand why Helio suddenly appeared so close to her. Liliana begins to blush with shame, and the Emperor even finds it amusing to watch her reaction. She still doesn't understand why the man decided to cover her with a blanket. After this, Liliana decides to ask directly why Helio is so kind to her. The Emperor certainly didn't expect to hear such a question late at night. The man makes his gaze serious and leans towards our heroine. The girl is speechless from such a close distance between them. But Helio simply says that all this is so as not to have to endure the terrible smell of food. It seems that our heroine expected to hear a completely different answer. The man then explains that the whole world considers the Emperor a heartless son, but apparently, except Liliana. He knows that his mother told her about how his childhood went. However, he does not understand why our heroine refused to accept her offer. This question baffles the girl and causes great anxiety. Liliana clenches her fist to somehow cope with the tension and untangle her thoughts. After this, our heroine gathers her courage and turns to face Helio. The girl reports that what happened to the Dowager Empress is truly terrible. However, this does not completely absolve her of all blame for what happened earlier. No one in this world has the right to call the Emperor a heartless son, because no one can understand the pain that he had to endure. Even though it was reckless, Liliana decided to be sincere with Helio. However, a heavy silence fell over the room as Helio rose from his bed. After this, the man slowly extends his hand towards Liliana's face. He asks in an angry tone if the girl just felt sorry for him. His eyes were full of fury, and every muscle in his body was tense with indignation. It seems that our heroine was a little mistaken with the idea of being sincere. And yet, as Helio holds her jaw in his hands, she decides there is no turning back. Liliana reiterates her words and adds that she is sorry for the Emperor's childhood, because she understands very well what it means to be a rejected child. After these words, the girl, with a tremor in her body, waits for what reaction will follow from Helio. To her great surprise, the man softened and removed his hand from her face. Liliana can't believe the Emperor forgave her so quickly. With a contented face and a feeling of calm, she lies back under the covers. The girl thanks her husband, who advises her not to bow down with such injuries. Then he adds that Liliana's father didn't even remember her name. Helio understands our heroine and advises her to just rest a little. Noticing the Emperor's smile, the girl can finally relax. Obviously, the conversation went pretty well, and now it's time to go to sleep. However, another request to His Majesty comes out of the girl's mouth. She asks him not to be indifferent to the child they will have in the future. Of course, First Liliana will do everything to avoid pregnancy, but it cannot be ruled out that everything will go as in the original story. In that case, the throne and crown will no longer have any meaning. It will be enough that the child will not be lonely and will live a happy life. The Emperor, once rejected by his mother, is touched to the core by this request. He tells Liliana that he understands everything, and after that, the girl can finally sleep peacefully. However, Helio is uneasy about the way the girl presented this request. Her words sounded as if she would not exist in the future. It's as if after the birth of the child, she will suddenly disappear somewhere. With the first rays of light, our heroine wakes up in the complete silence of the Emerald Palace. Helio is already awake at this time and looks as if he is shining. To justify her late awakening, Liliana says that she has nothing to do today, and the Emperor decides to joke that with so much sleep, the girl should grow even more. Although Helio has been asking for trouble since the morning, our heroine is still glad that he is in a good mood. He's apparently happy that he won't have to endure the Dowager Empress's food. However, just as Liliana was thinking about this, the maids entered the room with breakfast. The maid reports that this food was prepared by the Dowager Empress. Obviously, Helio's plan didn't work, and his mother even got him in another palace. Taking a closer look, Liliana sees that the food looks very tasty. But at this moment, she decides to remain silent so as not to anger the Emperor. However, after his wife's delighted reaction, Helio decides to leave the food for her. No matter how much Liliana tries to justify not eating such a hearty breakfast, all her efforts are in vain. And after the meal, the girl will have to tell everyone that it was she who ate her mother's food. And from that moment on, everything that the Dowager Empress prepares, Helio will send to his wife. This is how the first night that the spouses spend together in the same bed goes. After this, the Emperor begins his work in his office. But all this time, a mysterious smile and laughter never leave his face. Helio's assistant has been serving him for a long time, but this is the first time he has seen him like this. However, the emperor notices that the man is staring at him and points it out to him. Then the assistant decides to assume that something good has clearly happened to Helio. And the emperor explains that he now understands people's desire to have pets. In general, it seems to him that the Emerald Palace is too far away and should be moved. Then, Helio adds that the Empress Consort needs to be moved closer to him. Alice's palace would be ideal for this, where the girl can establish connections. However, the man realizes that he has completely forgotten about Lady Gavial. Helio would not at all like his wife to encounter this candidate for Empress. Therefore, he decides to change his mind and leaves Liliana in the Emerald Palace. He explains this by saying that such a small woman would simply get lost in a large palace. And the assistant immediately understands that the emperor has become more attached to the princess than expected. At this point, the men's discussion is interrupted by the arrival of a servant. He announces that Her Majesty the Dowager Empress has arrived. The assistant decides to quietly ask if he should send the woman back. But the emperor asks to let his mother in to find out where the wind that causes chaos is blowing from. After this, the atmosphere in Helio's office begins to become very tense. His gaze reveals the hatred and coldness he feels towards his mother. After some time, the Dowager Empress is already enjoying tea in her son's study, and at this moment, he is trying to understand what is going on and why the woman came to him. Previously, Helio thought that his mother would decide to be indifferent to him all her life. But the Empress avoids the conversation and says that the tea smells very nice. However, Helio is determined to find out what the matter is. After this, the woman, with a sad voice, replies that she is very sorry. In all his life, the emperor had never heard anything like this from her. And the Dowager Empress adds that she is sorry with all her heart. But after these words, Helio decides to just laugh in the woman's face. The mother can do whatever she wants, but even with such tricks, she will not return to her homeland. However, the woman explains that she did not come here to make deals. She came to apologize for the grave sin that she committed against her son, and at the same time, she tried to hide behind the thought that from now on, things would get better. At this moment, Helio silently sits down in the chair opposite his mother. He doesn't believe in the sincerity of his mother's words and decides to find out who told her to do this. All his life, he thought that he would continue to observe the same character, but the woman begins to behave strangely. In this case, the conclusion suggests itself that Empress Liliana could have ordered her mother to do this. And indeed, the girl came to the Dowager Empress today. She decided to apologize to the woman and show respect. And Mother Helio understood from the very beginning that her son ordered her to eat his breakfast. And yet, Liliana felt it necessary to apologize, even though it wasn't her fault. The girl also decided to find out why the woman wanted to improve her relationship with her son. The Dowager Empress explains that this is all because of Liliana. Seeing His Majesty having fun next to her, she drew many conclusions, so she realized that she didn't know her son at all, and realized something. Even if Mother cannot return to her homeland, she no longer has any reason to hate Helio. After these words, a silent pause hangs between the women, in which each of them is immersed in her own thoughts. Liliana decides to give the Dowager Empress some advice, but she gets there first. Mother Helio informs that it is too late to restore the relationship. This fact makes the woman sadly realize her doom. But Liliana is adamant that she can still apologize. From the reaction of the Dowager Empress, it is obvious that she could not bring herself to do this. Of course, it will be up to His Majesty whether he accepts this apology. But even so, a woman should still apologize just because she thinks it is necessary. After all, no one except Mother can ask for forgiveness for what happened. As expected, Helio has no intention of changing anything after this apology. Even though Mom decided to take this step, it still won't change their relationship. However, the burden on the Dowager Empress's shoulders seemed to become lighter. However, it remains sad that her son has no intention of accepting the apology. But as soon as the woman was about to leave, the Emperor decided to stop her. Helio asks his mother to attend the Foundation Day ceremony this time. Every year, the woman avoids this event and was surprised that this time her son himself invited her. She believes that if she plays the role of a mother well, she will be able to put down roots in her new homeland and appreciate her child. After her apology, the Dowager Empress leaves her son's house. All the time she spends on the road, she thinks about her past mistakes. His memories recall moments when Helio still held out hope of receiving his mother's approval. One day, he found a canary in the garden and wanted to share it with the Empress. Perhaps a lot would have changed now if she had paid attention to him earlier. Maybe even just one time would have been enough to act differently. And who knows, perhaps thanks to this moment, mother and son could now make peace. But even the fact that Helio asked the Dowager Empress to attend the founding ceremony this time was already a success. If only a woman could understand earlier that it is worth making the first move. Luckily, Liliana came along and was able to push her mother to take this step. But she is still tormented by the thought that she has wasted a lot of time. And even the landscapes surrounding the imperial palace do not please the woman who is hated by her own son. Over time, the stormy days passed, and Helio began to accept breakfast from his mother. Although Liliana didn't hear any thanks, the food was no longer thrown away. The emperor also stopped barging into the girl's room, demanding that she sleep with him. At first, our heroine was worried, but then she realized that she had not interfered in the relationship between mother and son in vain. If she had left everything as it was, it would only have gotten worse. After all, in the original story, these two were able to reconcile only after the birth of their second child. At this moment, a maid appears in the room and announces a package from the Dowager Empress. A woman sent her son's wife a dress for the Foundation Day festival. The maid asks if she can bring it to the mistress's day. After this, an incredibly beautiful outfit appears before our heroine. The girl doesn't even know if she is allowed to wear such luxurious dresses. But if Liliana refuses such an expensive dress, the Dowager Empress is unlikely to be pleased. In the letter, our heroine reads that Mother Helio wore this outfit when she first appeared in public. It turns out that this is a kind of blessing, and now Liliana will definitely not be able to return this dress. Suddenly, Sophia starts spinning and explains that this image suits the lady's hair color very well. She must be genuinely happy that Liliana has become friends with the Dowager Empress. But when a personal maid suggested wearing sapphire earrings with her dress, one of the maids refused. Sophia was a little upset that the rules did not allow her to wear a dress or jewelry that was the same color as the emperor's eyes. However, Liliana decides to calm her down and shows her other earrings, which she really likes. On the day of the founding festival, a large number of people gathered in the empire. All the aristocrats filled the hall where the celebration was taking place. Lady Gaviel looks stunning as always at this event. People are saying that she will most likely be the one to have His Majesty's first dance. After all, the Empress consort is a foreigner, and Lady Gaviel will one day become a true empress. Liliana benefited from such talk, as she did not intend to attract unnecessary attention. And while the emperor appears in the ballroom, our heroine plans to sit quietly on the sidelines. It is obvious that Helio thoroughly prepared his image for such an event. He raises his glass and thanks those gathered for the honor. The emperor also adds that their family will not forget the loyalty of these people. Helio's first dance is about to begin, and Liliana decides to slip away unnoticed. While our heroine gets lost in the crowd, the emperor comes down to the guests. Lady Gaviel is already mentally imagining Helio inviting her to dance. When he is near, she is already confident in the attention he has shown her. But suddenly, the man passes by and does not even notice the candidate for empress. At this time, Helio notices Liliana and asks why she is hiding in the corner. The emperor extends his hand to his wife and asks her to come to him. It is impossible to convey the mixed feelings that arose in our heroine at that moment. And Lady Gaviel is ready to burn with anger because of such blatant impudence. But everything around them no longer becomes important to these two. At this time, the emperor's assistant and his mother cannot hide their emotions. Liliana, in response, extends her hand and touches her husband's palm. And at that moment, he asks permission to invite her to the first dance. Of course, under such circumstances, Liliana cannot refuse. The girl replies that this invitation would be a great honor for her. After this, our heroine and the emperor begin to dance in front of the entire audience. Helio notices that the girl is very nervous and asks her about it. And Liliana explains that this is her first public appearance in Carlo's empire. Dancing with the great emperor in front of everyone is very exciting, and Helio is very flattered by these words. He explains that the mother of the future king really does need to be a good speaker. Liliana is shocked that Helio announced in front of everyone that their future child will become king. Of course, it will not be difficult for this person to put these words into practice. But our heroine did not at all think that Helio was going to put his child on the throne. When the dance ends, Liliana decides to take advantage of the confusion and escape. While everyone is pestering the emperor with questions, our heroine goes out onto the balcony. Suddenly, Lady Gaviel's menacing voice seemed to strike the girl in the back. The woman was clearly unhappy that the emperor gave the first dance to someone else. Liliana realizes that this is quite a good reason to be angry. But still, she had no intention of quarreling with the candidate for empress. The girl decides to lighten the atmosphere and compliments the woman. At this moment, a wicked grin appears on Lady Gaviel's face. She wonders if Liliana finds it unpleasant to be around her. Our heroine is shocked by this statement and explains that this is not true at all. But the woman reports that during the conversation, the empress consort hid behind her fan. Some people might misunderstand this, or it might be really difficult for Liliana to be open. After these words, the atmosphere around the girls became even more terrible. Lady Gaviel adds that in some countries, people who lack confidence hide their faces when speaking. The woman explains with a sneer how rude and impolite this looks. Liliana realizes that the woman quickly realized that she was not versed in the customs of the empire. At this moment, the villain's steps head towards our heroine. Coming closer, Lady Gaviel informs her that the empress is occupying a position she is not worthy of. Liliana doesn't answer her rival and looks away. There are already too many people watching them, and it is necessary to remain calm. If they haven't reacted to Lady Gaviel's words yet, it means they haven't decided whose side to take. Now the people are faced with a choice, either in favor of the future empress or in favor of the current one. Even though Liliana is a consort, the emperor still showed that she is his chosen one. In this case, our heroine decides to act in public. She abruptly removes the fan from her face, causing confusion in the villain. After shedding a few tears, Liliana explains that she didn't mean to do anything bad. Then she grabs her cheek and asks not to reprimand her again. The girl explains that Lady Gaviel had already taught her a lesson during their last meeting. But the woman is unhappy again, and has she really done something wrong again? When Liliana takes the villain's hand, she can no longer hide her anger. She pushes away the empress, who is upset. At this point, people begin to whisper that there was an incident where Lady Gaviel slapped the empress. Even though she is part of the duchy, such an act is still an act of disobedience to the imperial family. And if she behaves like this now, then how arrogant will she become as an empress? For the rest of the time, Liliana covers herself with a fan, which shows uncertainty. Our heroine deliberately used this gesture for her own purposes, to cover up her smile. At this moment, another female voice is heard on the balcony. The appearance of the Dowager Empress proved to be a salvation for our heroine. The woman decided to ask how she felt after her first dance with His Majesty. Liliana replies that she had already managed to rest during the break and decided to communicate with other noble ladies. After this, the Dowager Empress turns her attention to Lady Gaviel. She wonders if she really did reprimand consort Liliana. To this, the woman replies that she simply gave the girl advice about the laws of the empire. However, Mother Helio does not understand how one can give advice with the slap that was given to Liliana. And the training of the Empress consort could wait until Lady Gaviel had risen above her in status. Obviously, this was a direct warning to the villain. Even though the Empress Dowager is not involved in politics, she still stands above. And now His Majesty's mother has sided with Liliana and drawn a line in front of Lady Gaviel. Therefore, she will no longer attack our heroine and risk incurring the wrath of the imperial family. The villainess begins to smile and asks Liliana to dispel the rumors that have begun to circulate throughout the empire. But the girl is not particularly happy that all the arrows are flying at her again. On the other hand, our heroine did not expect that the Dowager Empress would stand up for her. Continuing the argument would only cause more problems, and denying the slap would only humiliate the Empress Dowager. Luckily, at this moment, one of the servants interrupts the girl's conversation. He explains that his master asked to summon the Empress consort to an audience. Lady Gaviel is outraged and does not understand by whose right some person dares to call upon the emperor's wife. Then the servant adds that this is a request from Marquis Willem himself, who is interested in the magical stones of Nieta. This man hit the empire like a comet and plays a major role in the original story. Moreover, Emperor Helio himself awarded him this title. According to the novella, he was a military slave in whom Helio saw talent. He will later become an ally of Liliana's daughter, while his son will support the main male character. At this point, the Dowager Empress explains that Marquis Willem has achieved great success in the war. There are probably some important things he wants to discuss with Liliana. Our heroine listens to the words of Mother Helio and decides to go to the meeting. While Lady Gavielle spits with anger, Liliana asks a servant to take her to the marquise. It was obvious that the villainess was too tough for the girl for whom the imperial family was ready to stand up. At this time, our heroine goes outside, where only the murmur of water in the fountain can be heard. Not far from her, she sees a man dressed in a robe. The fact that it's too secluded a place for conversation makes Liliana a little afraid. But when the man shows her his face, she almost screams in surprise. This man turns out to be Helio, who asks his wife to be quieter and calms her down. He promises to remove his finger from her face if she doesn't make a sound. After all, right now, the Emperor intends to escape from the event together with his wife. However, Liliana does not understand what Marquis Willem has to do with it. At this moment, Helio begins to suspect that his beloved really wants to see him. But our heroine simply doesn't understand why the Emperor invited her outside if the banquet turned out to be boring for him. Helio explains that he just wants to play and gives Liliana the clothes. After this, the girl puts on a dark robe, which will help them escape. And the Emperor adds that the city's Foundation Day festival is much more fun. Liliana starts laughing heartily, and Helio reminds her that he saved her from the fight. The man immediately noticed that after the first dance, Lady Gavielle followed his wife. After this, Liliana concludes that the Emperor helped her on purpose. However, he does not answer her directly and tells her that it is a secret. And yet, even after getting into the carriage, our heroine is interested in the reason for all of today's actions. For example, she can't understand why the man spoke about the future king in front of everyone. If he thinks that this will make Liliana want a child more, he is wrong. However, Helio explains that he did this for a completely different reason. His announcement was made to protect his unborn child and his wife. From the outside, it may seem that Helio's actions are similar to those of the previous emperor. He also brought here a princess from a foreign kingdom to unfamiliar lands. However, Liliana is sure that despite all the similarities between Helio and his father, he is very different from him. It seems that the girl should tell the emperor that he is not like that at all. But who is she to tell him this without really knowing him? If Liliana accidentally says something wrong, it could hurt him. Having thought about all this, the girl says that if the emperor is sorry, then let it be twice. Helio once promised his wife that he would protect her from Lady Gavielle. Obviously, today's act was already the second one. All Liliana wants is to survive in this world full of dangers. And Helio replies that his wife's will to live is much stronger than it seemed. But the life of the main character was far from pleasant. However, Liliana is sure that even in the worst life, you can find pleasant moments. Just at that moment, an incredible fireworks display explodes in all directions above the spouses' heads. Our heroine presses herself against the window to get a better look at this spectacle. But Helio begins to worry greatly about the girl and asks her to be careful. However, Liliana no longer hears the warnings, as all her attention is focused on the fireworks. The emperor thinks for a moment and decides to enjoy the spectacle as well. But before that, Helio takes the girl by the hand to protect her from the flashes and loud noise. The man explains that it is very dangerous to lean against the window in such a situation, and Liliana is now undoubtedly confident that she will be right again. Even if things aren't so great in life, good things still happen. And again, this modest girl with pink hair made the great emperor think. In the city, the day of the founding festival is indeed more joyful than in the palace. Once in the square, Helio wonders if this is the first time Liliana has seen fireworks in her life. But our heroine explains that she has already seen them, and every time this sight causes her delight. However, she adds that the last time this happened was a very long time ago. At this moment, Liliana realizes that she knows the fireworks from a past life, but she has absolutely no memory of how she died or when she saw the fireworks. She knows for sure that this is not the first time she has seen them, but not in such a busy place. In a past life, this place was somewhere very far away and much higher than it is now. Helio notices that the girl has stopped answering him and is thinking about something. Liliana apologizes and decides to change the subject by suggesting something tasty to eat. In fact, the emperor agrees that it wouldn't hurt to fill our bellies. He takes his wife by the hand and pulls her to some unfamiliar place. Liliana is not at all comfortable walking in this position, but Helio just doesn't want to lose her in the huge crowd. Because of the girl's short stature, she should stay closer to the man. After a short time, the spouses have a delicious shashlik in their hands. Liliana is shocked that such delicious food can be found at a simple market. While our heroine enjoys her meal, Helio asks her to call him simply by his first name. After all, among the common people, someone might hear that Liliana is calling His Majesty and cause a commotion. In this case, our heroine suggests that the man call him Sir. She notices that the emperor enjoys street food. However, she wonders where he gets the money that commoners use. It turns out that the man had prepared for this date in advance. At this moment, he notices that the girl has dirtied her hand and decides to wipe it with his handkerchief. Liliana decides to calm down and not get carried away by the fact that the emperor himself is courting her. After this, Helio gives her his handkerchief, which has the family coat of arms on it. He even advises the girl to boast about such a gift to someone. Liliana replies that she is very grateful, but would not like to find herself in such a situation again. Then, our heroine looks ahead and sees an archery competition there. Helio explains that he doesn't particularly like this kind of entertainment, as it attracts a lot of attention. Suddenly, the host starts looking for the next participant, and Liliana decides not to miss the chance. The girl raises her hand and volunteers to be the next shooting volunteer. However, she explains that the guy standing next to her will be the one doing the shooting. It was very unexpected for Helio that Liliana would decide on such a stunt. While the host asks the tall guy to come forward, the emperor tries to comprehend what is happening. He promises that someone will have to be scolded for this a little later. And yet Helio decides not to refuse to participate and comes forward. The host warms up the crowd with intrigue about how many points this guy can score. Meanwhile, the emperor takes up a bow and focuses on the target. After a while, the crowd of observers already loses count of the number of hits. People admire the fact that this guy never missed. As expected of the emperor, he excels in marksmanship and accuracy. He must be used to performing in public and not even nervous. Suddenly, a guy running past the crowd knocks down Liliana. The girl can't do anything about the fact that they started pushing her out. A little more, and she will be completely lost in the huge crowd of people. Suddenly, her husband's hand gently grabs hers, and the girl's panic evaporates. Liliana no longer had any hope that the emperor would be able to find her among the people. However, one can say with complete confidence that he will never lose such a girl. Looking into his eyes, our heroine blushes and becomes embarrassed for a moment. It seems impossible to take your eyes off his piercing gaze. But Helio was still able to bring Liliana to her senses when he instructed her to stand only in the front row. After these words, Liliana feels that something is wrong with this story. Of course, the emperor doesn't have many people with whom he can communicate openly. But is it really necessary to be so protective of a girl he barely knows? Perhaps this is because in the future, Liliana is supposed to become the mother of his child. However, in that case, Helio would not have put her in danger. After all, this ruler is truly a mysterious figure for our heroine. So Liliana and His Majesty spend a wonderful evening among the common people. Returning home, the emperor decides to ask if everything is all right with his wife. After all, he returned the prize for first place, which was a gold decoration. But for some reason, Helio doesn't mention that he then hit the target 20 more times and received the remaining prizes. It is unlikely that a simple street vendor has a lot of gold that he is willing to give away. That's why our heroine decided to take a simple piece of jewelry as a prize. She explains that a souvenir must first and foremost be beautiful. Helio is upset that the bracelet is not made of gold, and Liliana reminds him of the gifts he gave her. However, after some time, the girl realizes that the emperor just wants to appear caring. She explains that she likes the bracelet, even if it is fake. But the emperor does not give up and explains that Liliana has a lot of jewelry and does not need a fake at all. However, Helio does not understand at all that there is much more meaning behind this decoration. Seeing Liliana's delight at the fake, he becomes deeply puzzled. Then the girl reports that this is the first time she has received something like this from someone other than her mother. This is not just some kind of gift or reward given for rank. At this moment, Helio is again overcome by a wave of strange feelings. He once again sees Liliana's contented face, which she had when she was delighted by the fireworks. Trying to appear serious, the emperor asks the girl not to smile like that, and she remembers that Priscilla said that Liliana looks like a fool when she smiles. However, Helio explains that his wife is very beautiful at this moment. After such an unexpected compliment, Liliana is ready to burn with embarrassment. Trying to cope with her emotions, the girl turns her face away. Liliana stops smiling and becomes lost in her thoughts. And the emperor continues to watch the girl for the rest of the time. Finally, the moment comes when the carriage passes the back gate of the palace. But Helio keeps his eyes on his wife, who is sitting opposite him the whole way. And Liliana can no longer stand the deep night that makes her want to sleep. At this moment, the emperor decides to sit next to our heroine. It's still a long way to the palace, and he advises the girl to take a rest during this time. Liliana lays on the man's shoulder and says that the Dowager Empress helped her today, but she is too high in status to waste her energy on someone like her. Having finished this thought, the girl finally plunges into a sweet sleep. And Helio at this time experiences a huge sense of satisfaction. After all, Liliana's head on his shoulder is the best reward of the evening. The next day, events unfold in the heart of the Emerald Palace. It all starts with wild screams coming from Liliana's room. The girl jumps out of bed and cannot believe what she sees. After all this time Helio was sleeping next to her, and she didn't even suspect his presence. Liliana doesn't understand why the emperor has snuck into her room again. Seeing his exposed muscular arms, she decides to cover the man with a blanket. But instead, the blanket falls even lower from the emperor's body. From such muscles and an incredible picture, Liliana falls into a stupor for a moment. But was Helio really sleeping next to her naked all this time? Suddenly, Liliana doesn't even notice how she starts to fall off the edge of the bed. Luckily, the vigilant emperor manages to catch her in time. The man holds his wife tightly and advises her to be careful. After this, he returns Liliana to bed and hugs her. While our heroine is burning with embarrassment, Helio asks her not to make a scene from the very morning. Liliana tries to figure out why the emperor ended up in her room. To this, the man replies that he could not leave the girl to sleep in the carriage. After he brought her to the Emerald Palace, he could no longer leave. The emperor then explains that he will protect his wife in his own way. Liliana understands that if Helio left the Emerald Palace, it would indicate his disfavor towards his wife. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, our heroine decides to resign herself and ask the maid to dress the emperor. However, according to local laws, it is His Majesty's wife who must dress him. Helio even decides to assign Liliana a teacher so that she can better understand the foundations of the empire. Our heroine agrees with this, since yesterday, Lady Gavielle almost managed to insult her. After this, Helio asks the girl if she liked the festival. The second part was obviously more fun than the first, where Liliana had to listen to insults. And the emperor reports that all the preparations for the festival were made by his younger sister, Lucia. Liliana understands that the man is hinting at her inaction and explains that the empress usually does this. And His Majesty's wife is a consort, so the princess was in charge of the preparations. After these words, Helio asks that next time it is Liliana who will take care of this. There is a banquet in honor of his mother's birthday soon, and he wants his wife to take care of the preparations. The emperor explains this by saying that although he does not have an empress, he still has a wife. But Liliana says that if a man were to become engaged to Lady Gavielle, he could leave the preparations to her. At this moment, the girl feels how her husband's mood has changed. Then Helio replies in a serious tone that he does not want this marriage. Our heroine certainly didn't expect to hear such a sincere revelation. She even wonders if the emperor isn't afraid that she will spread rumors about this. But Helio only smiles and explains that the rumors coming from his wife will definitely be interesting. After the man is dressed, he sits down silently on the sofa. A multitude of unpleasant thoughts puzzle His Majesty's head. Even Liliana notices that the emperor is seriously thinking about something. She sits down next to her and tells her that Lady Gavielle will hate her very much. Surely the candidate for empress thinks that this cunning fox Liliana has bewitched His Majesty and is interfering with their engagement. At this moment, Helio quietly turns away and begins to laugh. Having lightened the mood, our heroine decides to move on to the main question. She wants to ask Helio what is bothering him now. But the emperor replies that his problems do not concern his wife. However, the girl is sure that she will not be able to do anything with this information. Therefore, there is no better person to keep his secrets than her. It seems that such an argument makes His Majesty think seriously. After this, he softens his demeanor and reports that the Duchy of Gavielle has made a huge contribution to the last 3 wars. For this, they were granted the title of Duke and were shown respect in return. The Duke's achievements 3 generations ago were incredible, but the current Duke Gavielle is completely incompetent, and it is hard to believe that he is the descendant of such a great man. His daughter Visti is also not at all suitable for the role of future empress. Recalling her meetings with Lady Gavial, Liliana cannot help but agree with these words. This woman is arrogant and envious in her actions. At the same time, she is so unkind that she is ready to mock a princess from another country. The very thought of such a person becoming the ruling empress makes Liliana feel uneasy. Helio seems to read the girl's thoughts, and she says that she would not want such a status for Lady Gavial. Of course, if such a woman were to rule, then Liliana would simply die at her hands. However, our heroine does not reveal all her thoughts on this matter to the emperor. At this moment, the man gently touches her face with his hand. Liliana cannot understand what His Majesty is going to do, and the man explains that he is very sorry that she is the princess of Nieta. But since Liliana does not understand the meaning of these words, he decides to end the conversation. After this, Helio announces that it is time for him to go to his office. He advises Liliana to contact the Dowager Empress to help her with the preparations for the banquet. But our heroine tries to stop her husband and reminds him that by law, they must serve each other. In that case, Helio should have waited for her and not left so suddenly. After these words, the man strokes the girl's head and explains that she is too valuable to be the princess of Nieta. Our heroine is speechless and freezes in place from this revelation. The emperor gets into his carriage and drives away, while the girl watches him go. However, she is still trying to understand what his last words meant. After this, Liliana decides to obey the emperor and goes to the palace to see the Dowager Empress. But the servants explain that at the moment the woman is receiving a guest. Our heroine did not expect anyone else to visit Her Majesty. Helio asked Liliana to meet her, but this cannot be done right now. At this moment, a woman comes out of the room and announces that the girl can visit the Dowager Empress. Liliana sees this character for the first time, but she has a pretty good idea who it is. A woman with long blonde hair and a direct look. This is what Helio's younger sister, Lucia Carlo, looks like. She reports that although they are meeting for the first time, even from afar, it is clear that she is the Empress consort. Apart from the eye color, Lucia looks very much like her blood brother, but the woman is very outraged that preparations for the banquet were entrusted to a foreign princess. Even after all these words, Liliana does not feel offended. In the original story, Lucia might have seemed arrogant, but she wasn't. Having been enchanted by the main character, she became a caring aunt to her. Lucia also helped the little girl tell her father Helio that she loved him. The moment was so touching that Liliana didn't notice how she broke into a smile in front of the princess. After this, the woman leaves and asks not to even ask her for help. Liliana tried to stop the emperor's sister, but it was all in vain. The girl is annoyed that she wasn't even able to greet her properly. Our heroine begins to think that her awkward smile is to blame for everything. After this, Liliana goes to visit the Dowager Empress. The woman was already waiting for her son's wife, who was very grateful to her for her help during the festival. The Dowager Empress then asks Liliana to sit next to her. She had already heard that the Empress consort would be in charge of the banquet in honor of her birthday. That is why she called Princess Lucia to her to help the girl. The problem is that Liliana doesn't know the local customs and laws very well. After this, our heroine understands that Lucia was upset because of her. After all, it's unlikely that the princess would want to help in this matter voluntarily. At this moment, the Dowager Empress notices that Liliana has turned completely pale. The Dowager Empress even began to think that her son had cooled towards the girl, but Liliana assures that His Majesty is still very kind to her. And the Empress recalls that last night they both escaped from the festival, and if there are no problems between the spouses, then the woman is interested in what else could have happened to the girl. But Liliana decides not to talk about it, and this greatly upsets the Dowager Empress. Seeing such a reaction, our heroine reports that Princess Lucia did not like her at all. Of course, she doesn't mean to say anything bad, and understands why the woman considered her unreliable. Then the Dowager Empress explains that Lucia is only half His Majesty's sister. It is only because of her love for her heritage and honor that she is still allowed to remain in the palace. She is well versed in state affairs, and His Majesty keeps his sister close to him. Lucia is also incredibly kind-hearted, which makes it difficult for her to refuse requests. Therefore, the Dowager Empress is confident that Helio's sister will be happy to help Liliana. However, our heroine still feels that she will be an exception to Lucia's kindness, but she promises to Helio's mother that she will definitely visit the princess. After all, Liliana can only do what is currently within her power. After all, organizing the banquet is her first important task in the empire. However, already on the threshold of the palace, the maid informs that Princess Lucia is currently busy. The maid apologizes and cannot say when her mistress will have free time. Liliana can't believe that her efforts have failed right from the start. Most likely, the princess simply doesn't want to see the girl and is hiding behind the fact that she's busy. If you think about it, even the main character of the novella was not immediately able to get close to Her Highness. After this, Liliana decides to announce that she will wait for the princess until she comes out. After all, Lucia deliberately behaves coldly in order to keep away those who would take advantage of her kindness. But she's not very good at stopping someone who's persistently approaching her. After such a statement, the maid goes to the mistress and asks the guests to wait. She then announces that Her Highness the Princess has agreed to receive Liliana. It is impossible to express in words how happy our heroine was with these words. After the girl's plan worked, she finds herself inside the palace with Sophia. Even from the outside, Liliana had the impression that everything here should be luxurious and elegant. Suddenly, our heroine hears a voice from behind, asking what she is staring at. Lucia still tries to act arrogant and has no intention of being nice to Liliana. But our heroine thanks the princess for freeing up her time for her. However, Her Highness's voice continues to be as cold as an icy wind, and yet, from the original, Liliana knows what kind of person this is and continues to try to melt her heart. She says that she is not entirely familiar with local customs and asks for help in organizing the banquet. At this moment, Liliana notices that in a little while, the princess will give in. The girl decides to tell the story of how Lady Gavielle humiliated her for covering her face with a fan. At that moment, Lucia's hand suddenly grabs the chair next to her. Liliana even freezes in place from the force with which she squeezes the armrest. Lucia becomes incredibly angry and asks the girl to repeat what she just said. Then the princess begins to scold the consort for not knowing even the most basic principles of etiquette. But our heroine explains that her father doesn't even know her name, and all her sisters, except her, were trained in this. However, even so, Liliana watched the maids to learn etiquette. This story makes Lucia think that not all may be lost, and despite her appearance, this alien princess may still be useful. After this, Lucia invites Liliana to sit down and discuss something she definitely doesn't know. Our heroine is incredibly happy that the princess has softened. She sincerely thanks the girl and smiles again. But Lucia begins to think that with such a face, she looks like an idiot. The princess then explains that the birthday banquet should take place in the morning and end before sunset. While the women are establishing communication, the maids watch them with pleasure. Thus passed another day for our heroine in a foreign empire. As night fell, Helio, as always, decided to read a book. However, he has been feeling too tired lately. Everything is swimming before his eyes due to insomnia, which is driving him crazy. At the same time, the emperor learns that Liliana is now in the palace of the Silver Deer with Princess Lucia, but he is worried that at such a late hour, the girl went to his sister. Having learned that all this is for the sake of a banquet, Helio decides not to interfere with his wife. After all, the man appointed the girl to this role so that she could better settle in at court. After this, the emperor turns off the light and decides to try to sleep. However, he slept much better next to Liliana than alone. Now it's hard to understand why he can't sleep without this little woman. Helio even imagines that Liliana is actually lying next to him. Now that she was next to him, he would finally be able to sleep peacefully. A slight smile and a small blush appear on his face. After this, Helio reaches out to the phantom, which is not actually there. Unfortunately, at this moment, the hand hits an empty pillow. For a moment, this situation gives Helio a lot to think about. But since Liliana really isn't around, he doesn't really want to go to bed so early. The following days were spent in active preparation for the birthday banquet. Luckily, Lucia helped Liliana cope with the huge number of tasks. But even with such participation, our heroine still has a lot of work to do. The princess explains that preparations for the foundation day were even more complex. However, Liliana is confident that a celebration of this format should be organized by the future empress, and not her. At this point, Lucia says that it is too early to say that. She recently learned that the servant had ordered the wrong curtains, and the company was not accepting returns. Of course, one could use imperial authority to solve the problem. However, First, Liliana appropriately punished the servant who made the mistake, and she sent the curtains to the slums to be used as blankets. Later, Liliana assessed her remaining funds and ordered less expensive but similar curtains. It seems she has decided to throw herself into her work and is doing even better than Lucia thought. Our heroine explains that she never had money and that this happened often. Besides, common people clearly wouldn't mind some blankets, even if they were made from curtains, and Liliana would have had nowhere to hang such large curtains anyway. Lucia understands that Helio entrusted the banquet to his wife, not only because the position of the ruling empress is still vacant. Time flew by, and the day of the banquet in honor of the Dowager Empress's birthday arrived. However, Lady Gavielle immediately noticed that the curtains looked cheap. Many people around knew that the unsuitable curtains were sent to the slums, and now Liliana is famous there. But Lady Gavielle is only amused by the thought that a princess from a poor kingdom took pity on other poor people. At this moment, the Dowager Empress rises from her throne, and everyone around falls silent. The woman raises her glass and asks all the guests to join her. She then makes a toast and thanks Princess Lucia and Empress Consort Liliana. She would also like to express her respect to her son's wife for caring for the slums. The Dowager Empress also adds that everyone should follow her example. At this moment, all the guests' eyes turn to the girl, and Liliana worries that she has done something wrong. But Lucia says that everything is fine, and the girl just needs to smile. Ahead of all the guests, she sees Lady Gavielle, who makes her feel the tense atmosphere around her. It seems Visti was gossiping about the Empress Consort again. In this case, Liliana decides to publicly thank the Dowager Empress, and she, in turn, reports that, thanks to the consort, His Majesty will not have to worry about those in need. Hearing everyone praising Liliana, Lady Gavielle can hardly contain her anger and envy. Her father would also like the Empress Consort to help his daughter also try her best for the people. At this moment, Liliana feels how the atmosphere around her has become completely gloomy. After all, she perfectly recognizes the man in front of her, who is Duke Grint Gavielle. He is the current head of the Gavielle clan and the biological father of Lady Visti. Next to him, the candidate for Empress feels even more confident. But the problem is that this man will play a role in Liliana's future death. At this point, the Dowager Empress decides to inquire about how the Gavielle family wants to help. The man explains that he plans to send clean blankets to the slums and offer jobs to the people on his estate. As expected, after this, Liliana's gesture with the curtains will lose its meaning. At first glance, there is nothing wrong with such an act. Grint tries to do everything to show his daughter's desire to serve the emperor and care for people. But in reality, he is trying to bring the engagement closer. At the same time, Helio is not at all concerned about the Duchess's ostentatious generosity. Now all his thoughts are occupied only with the Empress Consort. Since Liliana is next to him, he asks how much the girl has learned about the Empire. She replies that she still has a lot to learn, but Princess Lucia has helped her a lot. After this, Helio praises his wife for the beautifully prepared banquet. He is also very happy that the girl has become friends with Princess Lucia. Perhaps Liliana should even take charge of preparing for the next Foundation Day festival. Thus, the Emperor openly declares that he is not thinking about engagement. But the girl doesn't understand why he so openly uses her as an excuse. Suddenly, Liliana turns her head and sees the Duke's cruel gaze. This atmosphere around him really scares our heroine. Even Lucia notices that the Empress Consort has turned noticeably pale. The woman hugs the girl and thinks that she is not feeling well. There are many empty rooms in the palace, and the princess invites Liliana to take a rest in one of them. The Dowager Empress notices the girl being led out of the hall. She is a little worried that Liliana has suddenly become ill. The observant Helio was also alarmed by this situation, which did not happen without reason. After this, he decides to raise his glass and proceed to the next part of the banquet. The man says that now is the time to listen to the speech. At this time, Sophia escorts her mistress to one of the free rooms. Finding herself in front of someone truly dangerous, Liliana was unable to resist and froze in place. Suddenly, a male voice from behind stops the Empress Consort. Liliana turns her head and can't believe her eyes. She recalls that this man stood next to Lady Gavielle during the banquet. The stranger brought 2 glasses of wine with him and said that his name was Ville Gavielle. The mere mention of her last name makes our heroine feel uneasy again. The man explains that he has come a long way to meet Liliana. and would not like her to leave. Sensing something was wrong, the girl turns around and says she has nothing to talk about. But the man stands in front of our heroine and tries to understand why she is so afraid of him. At that moment, the wine from Vile's glass spills right onto Liliana. Her dress is ruined and drops of red alcohol run down her face. Sophia begins to get very worried about her highness being doused with wine. Vile tries to somehow save the situation and offers his handkerchief. But our heroine does not accept help and pushes his hand away. After this, Liliana looks at him with a look that makes him feel uneasy. Vile clearly didn't expect to feel such intense excitement. He tries to make a second attempt and give Liliana his handkerchief. But the girl refuses and demands that he no longer wait for her like this. Surely all of this was set up by Visti to reveal even the slightest flaw in Liliana. However, Vale insists that his clumsiness is to blame for everything. Finally, Liliana reaches the room and meets another man there. She walked into the first door she came to and didn't expect anyone to be there. It turns out to be His Majesty's assistant, whose name is Turns. Sophia decides to report to the man that Vile Gaviel harassed her highness and spilled wine on her. The maid could not remain silent, as this man made her very angry. But Liliana asks that the assistant not inform His Majesty of this incident. However, the Emperor's male voice from behind suggests that it is too late to hide anything. Helio approaches his wife and asks her to explain who spilled wine on her. Our heroine tries to distort the true picture and says that she herself crashed into Vile, but in reality, if he hadn't stood in her way, this wouldn't have happened. All this time, the Emperor carefully removes wet drops from the girl's face and hair. However, Liliana politely informs that she can handle it perfectly well herself. At this moment, the Emperor realizes that he has done something wrong. He apologizes to his wife and says that he simply didn't think. The girl replies that everything is fine and thoughtfully turns away. After this, Helio also becomes immersed in his thoughts, and an awkward pause hangs between them. But the resulting silence was abruptly broken by Lucia bursting into the room. Everyone around was very frightened by her sudden appearance and raged towards Helio. The princess turns out to be very angry about what her brother did. From their conversation, Liliana understands that Helio has belittled the Duchy of Gaviel. She explains that such an act will not help Liliana in any way. However, both sides stand their ground and are not going to give in to each other. The Emperor explains that if Lucia crosses the line again, he will no longer be able to consider her his sister, and he has no choice but to treat Liliana exactly like that. Fortunately, their unpleasant conversation is interrupted by a gesture from the Empress consort. The girl asks her husband not to start an argument, as it is not the time for that. It seemed that Liliana's words made the Emperor cool his ardor. After this, he hugs the girl and helps her stop worrying. And at this moment, Lucia reports that she did not behave quite correctly. Yet this does not change the fact that Helio acted recklessly. But the Emperor explains that the Duke's attitude against the consort will encourage him to make plans. It is obvious that he will come up with something incredible and spend more than one day on it. But first, they should get the Empress consort back to the banquet and get her in order. After this, Helio takes out his handkerchief and applies it to Liliana. Suddenly, Lucia stops her brother and says that she will take care of the girl's appearance transformation herself. However, Helio reminds that he is married to Liliana, and there is nothing reprehensible in his touches. But in Lucia's opinion, these two are not suitable for each other at all, and do not look like a couple. After these words, Liliana's face immediately reveals all her embarrassment from these conversations. The Emperor and his sister notice the girl and realize that there is some truth in Lucia's words. And Helio even advises his wife to learn to control the expression of emotions. The Emperor's sister also adds that a man should clearly not be shameless and spy on a woman changing her clothes. This rationale seems reasonable to Helio, and he nevertheless decides to entrust Lucia with the care of his husband. And finally, Liliana hears that the Emperor asks her to better control her face at the banquet. After this, the girls decided not to waste time and began to transform our heroine. Lucia takes advantage of the moment and informs the Empress consort that she should expect an attack from Duke Gaviel. Our heroine agreed with this, as the expression on his face was very menacing. At this point, the Emperor's sister advises the girl to start building relationships with others. And after Lucia heard the Empress's story, an idea came to her mind. The girl then leans closer to Liliana and whispers a secret plan in her ear. The Empress Consort's reaction showed that she was a little shocked by this proposal. Lucia advises the girl to be strong, and having finished changing, decides to leave. Sophia and her mistress are left alone, and our heroine is perplexed. Sister Helio left so quickly that she didn't even have time to say goodbye. Taking advantage of the moment of solitude, the maid decides to report the news to her mistress. Sophia reports that she will soon be able to get what they previously agreed on. It's a little exciting for Liliana to hear that fertility drugs will be available to her soon. After the banquet was over, the entire imperial family gathered in the dining hall. Our heroine was not present at this dinner, as she decided to return to her palace. But the women are sure that if the Dowager Empress had called her, she would have come running at any moment. While Lucia and the Empress are talking, Helio doesn't even follow the course of their conversation. The mother notices that her son is clearly worried about something and is lost in his thoughts. At this moment, the Emperor raises his glass of wine and brings it to his mouth. In a cold tone, he informs that now Mother can return to her homeland. One day she said that she wanted to try to become a mother, and it was unexpected to see this as a deception. Now revenge has no meaning for the hated son, who has let go of all past grievances. Helio explains that the Dowager Empress does not have to leave forever. She may go there for a while as a long trip. As the Emperor's steps slowly move away from his mother, she announces that she has no intention of leaving. The woman explains that she hasn't even had time to properly pretend to be a mother yet. Even if she left, she would still continue to serve His Majesty and carry out his will. However, Helio reminds his mother that he promised her to do everything himself. Although the Dowager Empress helped Liliana, this still does not fall under her maternal duties. After this, Mother adds that during all this time, she has realized something. Even if she does return to her homeland, it will no longer bring her happiness. After all, being far from the Empire, a woman will constantly think about her son. This is probably the reason why she refuses to go anywhere. Although the Empress was unhappy here, she would also remain unhappy when she returned home. After these words, Helio decides to end the conversation and advises to do as Mother herself decides. Meanwhile, the Dowager Empress realizes that wherever she goes, she will be unhappy. It's a very sad ending that no one wants to go back to. Lucia decides to calm the woman down, as she feels very sorry to see her in such a state. Looking at the Dowager Empress's emotionless face turns out to be not so easy, and all this for the sake of a son who was also once inflicted with great pain. At this time, Helio thinks over all the words his mother said. It may have been a cruel statement, but she seemed pathetic to him. And that's it. He has a good reason to enjoy life. Standing in front of the window, Helio watches a beautiful sunset and remembers Liliana's words. He even imagines how she would enjoy this view with her sweet smile on her face. At this moment, he even begins to miss the one who rejoices in simple little things. The Emperor then gives orders to the servants to prepare the carriage for departure to the Emerald Palace. After some time, it is late evening, and Liliana remembers that she ate almost nothing at the banquet. Chuchu was very surprised that the girl didn't like the imperial desserts, but Liliana explains that her appetite was lost because of the strange, unfamiliar man. Judging by the fact that he had 2 glasses, he was clearly waiting for the Empress Consort. Duke Gabriel clearly wanted to say something to our heroine at this banquet. Chuchu decides to inquire about this man and learns that he is from the Den of Villains. Then, the little elemental promises Liliana that he will definitely scold this duke when they meet. Our heroine is amused by this reaction and advises getting rid of the chains first. In order to free Chuchu, Liliana needs to master spiritual magic as soon as possible. Suddenly, our heroine hears a knock on her room at such a late hour. Sophia runs inside and says that the lady needs to come with her as quickly as possible. The whole point is that a very important person arrived at the Emerald Palace. After this, Liliana runs out of her room in her pajamas. The girl runs through the corridors of the palace until she finds herself in the entrance area. There she sees His Majesty, who could not bear the long separation from the girl. A man becomes very happy when he sees the Empress Consort in front of him, but Liliana is very worried that he did not wait for her in front of the palace. Helio explains that he decided not to adhere to all the manners, since the girl had already gone to bed anyway. At this point, our heroine begins to worry about what made the Emperor come to her at such a late hour. Did he really decide not to keep his word and exercise his rights as a husband? Seeing his wife's agitation, the Emperor leans over and asks her not to worry. Be that as it may, Today, he will not allow any harassment. After these words, Liliana was a little taken aback, as she did not expect that all her thoughts would be written on her face. However, past events make her realize that Helio is no longer a danger to her. At this moment, the couple goes up to the bedroom, and the Emperor decides to discuss his strategy. But after a few seconds, Helio stops and falls silent. He then turns to our heroine and informs her that his strategy is still a secret to her. After this, they end up in bed, and the Emperor asks if Liliana wants to return to her homeland. The girl is sure that Helio is worried about this because of the Empress, but she insists that her situation is fundamentally different, and she has no reason to miss her homeland. The small palace she lived in was less than half the size of the Emerald one. The only thing that makes the girl sad is separation from her mother, but even in this case, Liliana is sure that the woman is better off there without her. After all, the abandoned princess has 4 older sisters in the kingdom. 3 of them showed absolutely no interest in our heroine, but the eldest Sil took pleasure in tormenting Liliana. At the same time, the girl could do nothing to somehow protect herself. And every time after another round of bullying, the sound of a whip could be heard in the kingdom. All this happened in front of Liliana's mother, who was unable to save the girl. It was extremely painful to watch the mother cry because of her daughter's suffering. There were days when the woman would get on her knees and beg him to stop, but no one listened to her, and the mother continued to watch him being bullied. After this story, Helio understands that Liliana also knows what a hard life is. At this moment, our heroine almost screams from the realization of what is happening. It's not even clear why she started talking about such a difficult fate. While the girl regrets what she said, the Emperor takes her hand. The man says that he is an abandoned child just like her. After that, true sympathy and understanding began to be seen in his eyes. Liliana didn't even expect that she and Helio had so much in common. Understanding all the Emperor's pain, the girl decides to hug him for the first time in her life. Our heroine says that she is very sorry that the man had to go through all this. At this moment, Helio presses the girl even closer to himself. At first, Liliana was confused, but then she realized that she had nothing to fear. Our heroine is very pleased that her support turned out to be so important for the Emperor. After this, the girl says that Helio should forgive the Empress. Since the son still loves his mother, it is worth doing this at least for his own sake. At this moment, Liliana notices that the Emperor has become completely sad. She decides to distract him and offers to sing him a lullaby before bed. The girl explains that this will make it easier for the Emperor to fall asleep without unnecessary thoughts. As strange as it may sound, Helio happily agrees to his wife's proposal. Liliana begins to sing the Emperor a lullaby that he has never heard. The girl explains that she learned this song from her mother, and all the common people of Nieta sing this lullaby. However, our heroine notices that her husband still can't fall asleep, so the Emperor asks her to continue singing with a peaceful smile on her face. After this, Helio gradually falls into a deep and sweet sleep. But in Duke Gaviel's mansion, not everyone can sleep peacefully that night. The man who poured wine on our heroine at the banquet can't forget about her. All his thoughts are now occupied only with the implementation of his plan. The man is adamant that he needs to meet the Empress Consort again. The next morning, Helio, as always, greets his wife earlier. Having woken up, he can't stop admiring our heroine. Liliana doesn't even suspect that someone is watching her closely. The girl continues to sleep, and Helio decides to touch her face. At this point, she starts muttering something and rolls over onto her other side. The Emperor is surprised that his wife is capricious even when she sleeps, but he doesn't want to treat Liliana carelessly and wants to give her a sense of security. After this, Helio intends to give her power in order to protect her. It seems that His Majesty likes the girl even more than he thought. It is gratifying that a person has appeared in this palace who arouses such strong interest. This is quite good news for the entire life that the Emperor lived. After waking up, our heroine first goes to the palace library. She is so impressed by its grandeur and the number of books that she cannot hide her emotions. Even by the most conservative estimates, there are at least 100,000 books here. As a child, Liliana was not allowed to enter the royal library. If she approached her, Sil would start screaming like crazy. But this is a different place, because here, no one forbids our heroine anything. At this moment, Chuchu finds something interesting and asks Liliana to look at it. Nearby, she sees a shelf with spiritual literature on it. Sophia is very surprised that her mistress has become interested in magic, and Liliana explains that she has abilities and she can see spirits. Moreover, Now this is the best thing to do in the palace. After this, Sophia asks the lady to stay in the library while she takes her hat and coat. At this point, our heroine realizes that she is not very well versed in the theory of spiritual magic. So she decides to start learning from the basics, and learns that there are 6 types of spirits. Besides the spirit of wind, there is also the spirit of light, earth, fire, and water. There is also a spirit of darkness, and each wizard chooses one of them. After this, people enter into a contract with the spirits, and in very rare cases, even with 2 spirits. But for the second option, you need to have a very high level of ability. Suddenly, Choo-Choo reports that someone is watching them in the library. Liliana notices the uninvited guest and is terrified. After all, she sees Baal Gabriel in front of her again, and it seems as if this is some kind of nightmare. And what is a nobleman from this family doing in the royal library? Baal notices the Empress's unwelcoming reaction, and does not understand why she is avoiding him so much. And her wariness is not at all connected with the fact that the man looks scary. Gabriel realizes that Liliana is even more vigilant than he thought. After this, the man says that he is glad to meet a person who also sees spirits. He recently signed a contract and therefore has access to the royal library. However, the Duke's family does not need additional permission to visit this place. After this, Baal decides to show our heroine his spirit, which is still at a low level. The spirit of Shasha begins to look with interest at Chucha, who is sitting on Liliana's shoulder. After this, she informs the owner that the 2 did not even sign a contract, and Baal notices that there are some chains on the Empress's spirit. But Liliana does not reveal the reason to the man, as she is still afraid of him. Then Baal himself comes to the conclusion that all this is because of his belonging to the Gabriel family. And while Liliana is hiding from him behind the wall, the man decides to say something. Ever since the last banquet, he had wanted to assure the girl that he was not her enemy. At this moment, our heroine remembers what happened that day. Lucia informed the girl that Beast and Baal Gabriel were not their father's accomplices. But even this does not mean that this person will not cause her any harm. Still, since Baal has spiritual magic, it is possible to get useful information from him. Liliana decides to give the man a chance, and he says that he knows the reason for the girl's fears. It must be because his family is openly trying to keep the Empress consort under control. However, he wants to tell our heroine a completely different story. Baal only asks you to meet him halfway and trust his words. He even offers to help Liliana 3 times, so that after that she can make a decision. Although the girl cannot trust anyone from the Gabriel family, she is ready to trust Lucia's words about this person. After this, Baal says that the first thing to do is to get rid of the spirit chains. He asks Liliana for permission to touch these shackles. At this moment, our heroine decides to find out from Choo-Choo herself. After some thought, the spirit gives permission for the man and his elemental to examine it. Shasha immediately flies up to the wind spirit to take a closer look at her chains. She touches the ball and immediately regrets doing so. Shasha smells a disgusting smell from the ball that is impossible to bear. Baal decides to pick up the item and experiences unpleasant feelings. The man excitedly reports that this ball is very unusual, and from these chains, he feels a very powerful dark force. However, this is not necessarily a bad thing, since one of the spirits simply has the power of darkness. Many people associate this with something evil, but in fact, this is not true. However, Liliana is worried that Shasha smelled a terrible odor. Baal explains that this may be due to the very powerful force contained within the ball. However, Choo-Choo herself does not smell any odor from her chains. The man himself is surprised why the wind spirit did not sense this. The closest force to the dark force is the force of light, and all the other spirits don't particularly like it. Liliana is so worried that even Baal finds it strange. After this, the man asks Choo-Choo to show her wind power. The spirit assures that she really does possess this power, but it has become greatly weakened. Baal justifies himself by saying that he did not blame the spirit for anything, and only assumes that the ball took away her power. After this, Shasha calls Choo-Choo simply a fly, which can no longer be a spirit without power. The man begins to scold the elemental, and it sticks its tongue out at its owner. Then Shasha says that she wants to sleep, and penetrates the man's chest. Seeing Liliana's surprised look, the man explains that after signing a contract, the spirit lives inside a person. It is strange that the girl does not know this, since the kingdom of Nieta is famous for its magical stones and many spirits. But our heroine explains that she did not leave the palace, and she did not have anyone who could tell her all this. And the reason she came to the library was to learn at least something about spiritual magic. After this, Bale reports that with so many books available, it will be difficult to choose the right one. At this moment, Liliana notices that the man is looking at her strangely. He asks the girl to choose a specific book, after which he will tell her whether it is good or not. Liliana thinks that this will be one of the 3 aids that Bale offered. After this, the man raises his hand to the shelf with books and takes out a suitable option. And at this moment, our heroine finds it suspicious that some person is so easily ready to help another. But Bale's attitude towards her is very different from Helio's. Now Liliana is absolutely sure that the man wants something from her. After this, Bale gives the girl the necessary books, and she decides to ask how he felt the dark force in the ball. The man says that it is a matter of time, and the spirit of darkness and light could free Choo-Choo from his chains. In this case, Liliana decides to make a contract with one of these spirits. But Choo-Choo is outraged that the girl decided to sign a contract with someone else. She suggests simply finding a person who has already made a contract with a spirit of light or darkness. At this point, Bale reveals that he just happens to know someone who has a spirit of light. He offers to count this as his first of 3 assists. However, this person is Bale's younger sister named Agrina Gabrielle. But the man insists that he does not share the views of the current head of their family, just like his younger sister. Of course, Liliana may not believe it now, but she can do it after 3 helps. However, our heroine does not want to get involved with Gabriel's family at all. On the other hand, she needs to get rid of Choo-Choo's chains. Ultimately, Liliana decides to agree to help, and Bale happily decides to set a date for the meeting. After this, our heroine says that if the conversation is over, then she will leave. Then the girl leaves the library with Sophia and heads to her palace. The maid is very interested in whether the mistress is really going to be in league with young Master Bale. Liliana explains that the princess advised her to find her people, and she separately mentioned the young Master Gabriel, who is worth taking a closer look at. Living in Nieta's palace, Liliana has had a lot of time and knows how to manage small amounts of money. But she doesn't understand anything about politics, and if there is a person like Gabriel nearby, then this will be a good option. But Sophia is most interested in the question of whether spirits really exist. At that moment, Choo-Choo replies that this is indeed the case, and it is right in front of her. Liliana starts laughing, because no one else can see this spirit. Hearing the mistress communicating with the spirit, the maid cannot believe that he is really here. Afterwards, they go outside so Liliana can have tea in the fresh air. However, at this moment, the girls notice a carriage with a strange coat of arms. Sophia is surprised that someone decided to visit them without warning. And at this moment, our heroine is very tense about who this carriage belongs to. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, the day passes calmly. The servant decides to enter Helio's office to tell him important news. He had just been informed of news related to the Gabriel family. The thing is that Visti suddenly decided to come to the Emerald Palace. This unpleasant news greatly upset the Emperor. He suddenly gets up from his chair and decides to go to the Emerald Palace. However, his mother, who is sharing tea with him, explains that this cannot be done. The woman is sure that His Majesty should not go to the Emerald Palace. Meanwhile, Visti is already getting out of her carriage and politely greeting our heroine. Liliana also greets her according to all the rules of etiquette, and does not understand the girl's purpose in pretending like this. Then the Empress asks what brought the girl to her home. Visti explains that it is unpleasant to hear this from the person with whom she will soon become a family. And so today, she came to the Emerald Palace as an interlocutor. After this, Lady Gabriel decided to head towards the entrance as if nothing had happened. Be that as it may, Liliana cannot ignore her completely. Once inside, Visti, as always, taunted our heroine for the fact that this palace somehow saved her face. Apparently, the Emperor liked this place for a girl from another country. At this point, Liliana decides to answer her reproaches in monosyllables so that she won't find fault with anything. All the girl wants now is to drink tea and get this villain out of the house. Meanwhile, Visti reports that she has admired His Majesty since childhood. Of course, besides her, many other women went crazy over the Emperor. But no one except Caroline dared to take direct action. Visti also adds that Liliana doesn't know anything about this girl, as she comes from a very boring family. Before this, the villain did not take our heroine seriously because of her alien origin, and now she humiliated Miss Caroline. According to Visti, this girl spent all day chasing after His Majesty, And during hunting competitions, she gave him her handkerchief and often wrote letters. At the same time, every tea party was accompanied by conversations only about His Majesty. After this story, Lady Gabriel calls the unfortunate girl shameless. But Liliana reports that Caroline simply admired His Majesty. And although our heroine asks Visti not to talk about people she doesn't even know, she continues this unpleasant topic. She reports that the emperor renounced his status and graduated from the academy with honors. He also always won all the wars and always looks great. It is therefore quite natural that many admire His Majesty. Suddenly, Visti stands up from her seat and slams her fist on the table. She is sure that all people are divided into different classes, and not everyone is destined to obtain the precious stone. Coming close to Liliana, the villainess asks if Liliana agrees with her. She digs her nails into her hand and explains that a precious pair must have a corresponding pair, and only such a stone will make it shine even brighter than before. By all this, Lady Gabriel, of course, meant herself. The atmosphere becomes quite dark, and the pain in her arm makes this moment even more terrifying for Liliana. And at this moment, Visti adds that our heroine has taken her place. Liliana decides not to hold back and loudly announces that she does not agree with this. Lady Gabriel didn't even expect that the girl could have such a reaction, and our heroine explains that she is not interested in this, since she is in the palace only as a hostage. These words seem to calm the villain of the day a little. At this moment, a female voice announces that the girls are having a very interesting conversation. This guest turns out to be the Dowager Empress, who has come to the aid of her daughter-in-law. After their last conversation with the emperor, she persuaded him not to go to the Emerald Palace. Helio even thought that his mother did not feel sorry for the Empress consort at all, but the woman explains that she doesn't even deserve such a wonderful daughter-in-law, and that the matter lies elsewhere. After all, Helio must demonstrate his love for the Empress through political actions. Most likely, the Gabriel family decided to show themselves off for a while. However, Helio is not going to sit back and watch all this. Mother understands that she didn't have time to think about this at all, and indeed, no one wants to let Gabriel get away with it. Something needs to be done about this villainess's arrogant behavior. After these words, the emperor comes to the conclusion that they will have to put Liliana in a difficult position. But if his mother's dear daughter-in-law is in trouble, the woman is not going to leave everything as it is. Therefore, she announces that she will go to the Emerald Palace instead of her son. Helio allows his mother to do as she sees fit, and the woman immediately sets out on her journey. Finally, the son reports that he didn't like the tea at all, so next time he asks to prepare a different drink. These words evoke a stormy spectrum of pleasant emotions in the Dowager Empress. She looks at her son, who said such words to her for the first time in his life. The phrase about next time echoes in Mother's head. This means that their next meeting has already been scheduled by the emperor. And now, his wife's affairs have been completely transferred to her, which speaks of trust. After this, the Dowager Empress is even more determined to do what she must. She wants to show her son that she really can be trusted. So Mother found herself in the Emerald Palace, and she was very interested in what the girls were talking about. The Dowager Empress does not show her attitude towards Visti and behaves according to all the laws of etiquette. The woman asks the girls to share their conversations with her. Liliana understands that things are really bad and she can't talk about what happened. After all, it would sound like a denunciation of Lady Visti, who already dislikes her. After this, the villainess will harbor an even greater grudge and become even more dangerous. But the girl cannot ignore the Dowager Empress's question. At this point, the woman asks to give her a little time if Liliana and Visti have already finished their conversation. Our heroine happily agrees and says goodbye to Lady Gabriel. With a forced smile, the villainess informs the Dowager Empress that she is already leaving. The mother says goodbye to the girl and thanks her for visiting the Empress. Together with Liliana, they watch the uninvited guest leave. Finally, our heroine can breathe a sigh of relief and feels that she is saved. And the Dowager Empress notices red marks on the girl's hand. She dares to suggest that Lady Visti has caused her daughter-in-law a lot of trouble. Liliana tries to justify herself and assures the Dowager Empress that everything is fine. But the woman takes the girl's hand and shows her the mark left by Lady Gabriel's nails. Our heroine decides to assure her mother that it's nothing to worry about. After this, the woman reports that she overheard part of their conversation. Liliana remembers in horror that at that moment she said that she was not interested in the emperor and that she was only there as a hostage. It is obvious that the Dowager Empress heard this part of the conversation as well, and now it is definitely the end for her. After all, right before her eyes, she declared that she was forced to become the emperor's concubine. At this point, the girl decides that the only way out is to fall to her knees. Liliana apologizes to the woman and explains that she said something stupid. Our heroine is sure that Mother Helio hardly loves her very much, since she does not have the main character's storyline. Therefore, she can only beg for mercy before Her Majesty. When survival is at stake, you have to swallow your pride. At this moment, the Dowager Empress asks her daughter-in-law to rise from her knees. After this, a long, awkward pause hangs between the women. Her Majesty decides to inquire why Liliana is looking at her so intently, and our heroine is just waiting for the woman to start scolding her. She wonders if the Dowager Empress is disappointed in her after everything. But the woman, on the contrary, thought that she treated her daughter-in-law very well, and that she should not be afraid of her. Did she really think that Mother Helio would punish her for such a trivial thing? Liliana begins to apologize, and her mother is annoyed that she has not done enough for her. While our heroine tries to convince her otherwise, the woman starts laughing and explains that she was just joking. She, too, was once unhappy with being made the emperor's concubine. Therefore, she cannot in any way blame Liliana for feeling the same. And to tell the truth, she ran to the palace in such a hurry because of Lady Visti's visit. Liliana is very grateful to Her Majesty for coming to save her. After this, the woman says that she would like to ask her something. Our heroine is ready to answer any questions, but she was not ready for this. After all, the Dowager Empress asked the girl if she liked her son. Liliana replies that she has no right to judge whether His Majesty is a pleasant person or not. And yet the son of the Dowager Empress is very handsome, although no one dares to say it out loud. And the Dowager Empress is confident that Helio treats his wife quite well. Liliana agrees with this and is very grateful to His Majesty, although she feels that she is unworthy of it. After this, Mother Helio explains that she does not want to put pressure on her daughter-in-law. However, if he does something bad to Liliana, she will definitely help her. Liliana finds it funny that mother and son really do look very similar. In fact, everyone in the palace thinks so, and the girl herself thought so too. But after words of support, she realized that they were also similar in character. Suddenly, Liliana realizes that she has said a lot too much, and the Dowager Empress asks her daughter-in-law to tell her more. She wants to know what other similarities she has with her son. Liliana recalls that these words were spoken to the main character of the novella. It was that girl who first pointed out to the Empress that she looked like Helio, and our heroine stole her role. The girl realizes that she has become very distracted by her thoughts and decides to continue the conversation. She explains that it will be more difficult to find ways in which mother and son are not alike. Constantly changing topics of conversation, the girls became so engrossed in chatter that they didn't notice the evening had arrived. They ended up having dinner with the Empress, and that's how Liliana learned that the woman cared about her. But for the first time in a long time, dinner in someone else's company seemed pleasant and relaxed to her. However, there is one thing that Liliana cannot turn a blind eye to. And after dinner, our heroine gives Sophia an important assignment. She asks the maid to find out everything about the noble Lady Caroline. The next morning, our heroine enjoyed the pleasant fresh air and warm rays of the sun. While the girl was reading a book, the maid Sophia entered her room. The girl reports that she has already checked the information about Lady Caroline. If what Visti said is true, then finding information about a person with such brazen behavior should not be difficult. After this, the maid informs that Lady Caroline is the only daughter of the Marquis of Liston. But the worst thing is that this girl is already dead. According to the official version, she died as a result of a carriage accident. But people whisper among themselves that this is the work of the Gabriel family. Now it is clear why she appeared so suddenly in the Emerald Palace the day before. It was a direct threat that if Liliana wasn't careful, she would end up like this lady. How much this villainess talked about wanting to become the Empress's friend, but in fact it was all a lie. But this whole situation makes it clear to the girl that the Emperor pities her, and his mother feels gratitude towards her, and even Princess Lucia has warmed up. And only Wisty Gabriel treats our heroine with an anger that is more hidden and acute than in the original. If it does continue, Liliana will die, just like in the novel's plot. After all, she is simply a political hostage who has practically no power. However, she has someone who is willing to help and become an ally. Therefore, Liliana decides that she will not stand by and watch everything from the sidelines. After this, the girl asks her maid to deliver a letter to Bail Gabriel. At the same time, Sophia must convey that Liliana wants to meet him as soon as possible. After a short time, Bail and our heroine gather in one place. Liliana is very grateful to the man for being able to come. After this, Bail introduces the Empress to his younger sister, Agrina. The girl immediately expresses her delight at Chuchu, sitting on our heroine's shoulder. It was obvious that Agrin had a strong desire to see the wind spirit. It is the first time she sees such a creature, and cannot hide her strong impression. Bail even has to apologize for his sister, who can't control herself when it comes to perfume. The girl also asks for forgiveness, and explains that she always wanted to make a contract with the spirit of the wind. But, as we know, such perfumes are extremely rare. Liliana recalls that the original story did not mention such information, and now it turns out that among the 6 elements, wind spirits are the rarest. The number of these creatures barely reaches 1/10 of the most prolific spirits of the earth. Most likely, Chuchu didn't share this with Liliana because spirits don't care about theory. And indeed, the wind spirit confirms that she is not particularly interested in such things. After this, our heroine decides to ask Agrina about the spirit of light that she possesses. At this moment, the girl shows off her spirit named Vivi. The spirits of light are said to be the most beautiful of all 6 elements. Liliana herself is convinced that Vivi is simply a wonderful creature. When Agrina despaired of finding the wind spirit, her spirit appeared before her, and she couldn't resist the opportunity to spend the rest of her life with this sweet creature. After this, Agrin explains to Vivi that she called her today to help her friend. At this moment, the spirit of light flies up to our heroine and meets Chuchu at the same time. But when she sees a ball of dark power, she cannot hide her delight. She is so impressed by this beautiful magic that she cannot break free from the chains. Vivi only dreams of touching the darkness just once. She doesn't even understand how such a wonderful power can cause problems for someone. But Agrin explains that the wind spirit is different from Vivi, and the ball does not allow her to move freely. The spirit of light promises to help Chuchu if she gives him a piece of this beautiful ball in exchange. Of course, the wind spirit promises to give anything just to get rid of the problem. After this, Vivi uses spiritual magic, and everything around is illuminated with a bright light. Liliana is very impressed by the sight of many glowing butterflies landing on the ball. This spiritual force interacts with the chains through light. A multitude of bright butterflies circle around the ball, and Chuchu even has to close his eyes from the blindness. After using spiritual magic for a long time, Vivi reports that everything is ready. The wind spirit is so impressed by her power that she cannot hide her emotions. However, Vivi explains that for now, this is all she can do. The spirit of light was able to shrink the ball, but the power contained within it was too powerful to be completely eliminated, and it will be better if Liliana finds another spirit of light who will be even stronger. However, if our heroine does this, people may mistakenly understand that she is looking for supporters. At this point, Bail wonders what has the Empress so worried, and our heroine explains that she doesn't want to hear from people that she's greedy. From the very beginning, she wanted a quiet life as the Emperor's concubine. After these words, Bail Gabriel seriously thinks about what he could do in this situation. The man then offers the Empress his help in finding a spiritual magician. This was unexpected for Liliana, as the ball reduction was already the 3rd help in a row. In this case, our heroine is perplexed as to why these two are so eager to do something good for her. The girl is serious and intends to find out what Gabriel's family wants from her. At this point, Bail asks how much influence Liliana thinks she can have on affairs in the Empire. The girl replies that she will be very lucky if she can just live to old age. Bail praises the girl for looking objectively at her capabilities and says that he is ready to be on her side. However, our heroine is not ready to believe his words so easily. But Gabriel explains that it is about the last act of His Majesty the Emperor. He does not hide the fact that he places Liliana above other noble people, and the request to organize the next banquet in honor of the founding day only confirmed this idea. At first, Bail, like the Empress, thought that this was said to provoke the Duke. But when the man decided to look into it better, he came across something strange. It states that Marquis Raquel of Nieta has applied for naturalization in the Empire. While Vivi is still holding on to the orb's dark power, Liliana reveals that she knows this Marquis. He was so influential in the kingdom that even the heroine, who lived in seclusion, knew about him. Raquel was originally a count, and after expanding his business and contributing money to the kingdom, he was granted the title of Marquis. Moreover, he was the lord of a stable territory in the west of the kingdom. But why would someone of such influence ask for naturalization in the empire? And Bale adds that, to achieve this, Raquel liquidated several large businesses, and even the kingdom of Nieta could not influence this in any way. Gabriel even suggests that there was someone involved, and this unknown person should receive the greatest benefit. He is clearly doing everything to ensure that the trading company's activities are transferred to Carlo. Liliana suggests that the empire itself should benefit greatly from this, but Bale explains that it won't be big enough to involve an influential person in the matter. Then our heroine understands that she will be the one who benefits the most from this, and this influential person will definitely try to become Liliana's supporter. The Empress comes to the conclusion that this is none other than Emperor Helio. But could His Majesty do all this for the sake of his wife? Most likely, this could have been done only for the sake of political maneuvering. Helio would never grant her such enormous power just out of love. However, Bale is confident that the Emperor wants to make Liliana a powerful political figure. But when the Gabriels are finished, he will never leave this power in the hands of his wife. That's why Bale wants to become Liliana's supporter, so that he can stay by her side even after this day. And he will not allow the girl to be locked up in some secluded castle, forgotten by the Emperor. Bale is ready to do all this in order to become the new head of the Gabriel family, and he plans to put his sister Agrin in the place of the Empress. That's why they want Liliana to walk this path with them. A few days after this conversation, our heroine began taking lessons from tutors. Lucia assigned them to her, and among them was Hasdan Cyril, who had previously taught at the academy. Although he gives Liliana a whole bunch of tasks, he still explains even complex topics clearly. Having finished the lesson and made sure that the Empress had learned everything, he was ready to give her time to rest. But first, Hasdan decides to give the girl homework. He wants Liliana to assess the situation with the naturalization of Marquise Raquel in the Empire. Our heroine is surprised, since usually the tasks are related to historical events, and now he wants her to describe the problem that is just beginning from her personal point of view. In other words, Hasdan is saying that the Empress should not let her connections with Nita influence her judgment. Liliana promises to complete this task, and the tutor leaves the office. After a long training period, our heroine decides to stretch her back a little. At that moment, she hears a familiar voice coming from behind. There she finds Helio, who has entered again without making a noise. Liliana was so busy with her lessons that they had no time to see each other at all. Because of the mountain of tasks that fell on her, she couldn't even think normally. At this point, Helio explains that the etiquette tutor is not strict enough since his wife forgot to greet him. Liliana apologizes frantically, and this reaction makes the Emperor laugh. The man places his palm on Liliana's face and asks her not to worry. He explains that there is also charm in this cheeky side of the girl. Liliana is puzzled that Helio has resumed his old behavior. He decided to tease again and said that he didn't understand what they were talking about. The Emperor decides to change the topic and asks how his wife's lessons are going. Lately, Liliana has been studying mainly economics and politics, as well as a lot of history, and Helio heard how the girl was given some difficult task. Our heroine explains that it is indeed complicated, but Hasdan explained everything clearly. In this case, the Emperor decides to test the girl's knowledge. He leans towards his wife and asks what she thinks about the naturalization that Marquis Raquel has submitted. The man doesn't expect to hear anything intelligent and is even prepared for a vague answer. And at that moment, Liliana remembers Bale's words that the Emperor would never leave power in her hands. One day, His Majesty will abandon the girl like useless trash, and Gabriel is confident that Liliana should be ready by this moment. But now the girl doesn't understand why Helio asked this question. Maybe he really wants to know her opinion, or maybe he just suspects something. After this, the girl says that she has nothing in common with Marquis Raquel. Of course, she had heard about him in the kingdom, but she had never met him in person. And if the Marquis were to live in the Empire, it could help Liliana shed her image as a defeated princess. In addition, this man will be useful to the Emperor, as he has experience in managing a large trading company. But Helio explains that this will depend on Marquis Raquel himself, and Liliana will be satisfied with this naturalization if it does not harm the Emperor. Besides, she will be pleased to know that her fellow countryman lives in the Empire. Even though he ran away because he most likely hates Nieta, It doesn't change anything. This only makes Liliana and Marquis Raquel even more similar. After all, the girl no longer has any connection with this kingdom. Helio begins to laugh and explains that his wife is much smarter than he thought. At the same time, she looks like a hungry squirrel that needs to be fed. And since the spouses are left alone, it's time to have dinner together. Liliana agrees, and at that moment, the Emperor suggests spending the night together. But by the time our heroine got the gist of what was said, it was too late to deny it. Now she will have to spend another night in the company of her husband. Alas, the Emperor cannot always engage in only stupid things. Although he had been able to enjoy the Empress's reactions to his congratulations last night, it couldn't last forever. Already early in the morning, he had to return to his cold and gloomy office. But thanks to the Empress, even tedious tasks no longer seem unbearable to him. However, at this moment, he is visited by a man whose self-esteem is greatly inflated. Duke Gabriel begins his conversation with the students who successfully graduated from the academy this year. In his opinion, the abundance of such talents speaks of the blessing of the gods of His Majesty. But regarding the naturalization of the Marquise Raquel, the Duke would like to give one piece of advice. He believes the Empire can do without this time bomb. After all, the Marquise had been loyal to the Kingdom of Nita for a long time, and his move to the Empire was highly suspicious. Moreover, there is information that His Majesty will not like. According to the Duke's sources, the Marquise and Empress Liliana have something in common. It is said that Raquel personally contacted the Emperor's wife. And if these two have something in mind, then Nieta will be able to influence the very heart of the Empire. Marquis Raquel is loyal to his kingdom, and Liliana was once the king's favorite princess. And in the Duke's opinion, these two would never turn their backs on their homeland. Helio decides not to prove anything to Gabriel, and only says that he will reconsider the question of naturalization. The Duke is pleased that he has managed to make the Emperor listen to him, but in fact, all his words turned out to be lies. And Liliana had not even answered the Marquis when he tried to contact her. It is very important for the Gabriels to ensure that the Marquis's request is rejected and that the Empress no longer poses a threat. In that case, there would be no need to even kill her, since she could simply be locked in the palace and made into a toy for Visti. A few days later, events unfold in the Emerald Palace. Marquis Raquel was very pleased to meet Princess Liliana in person. The girl warmly welcomes the guest and explains that she is no longer a princess, but the man replies that he is not yet naturalized here, and Liliana remains a princess to him. After this, he gives our heroine the thing she asked for. The girl takes the box in her hands and excitedly opens it in front of the maids. Then she thanks the Marquise for his help and promises not to forget this favor. But for the Marquis, it is more important to know whether he has fulfilled his role well. Liliana answers the man with silence, which confirms his thought. After this, Raquel is ready to leave, as after a long journey, it is time for him to rest. News of the Marquise and Lilan quickly spread throughout the empire. People gossiped that Raquel had given the Empress a gift. Some said it was a black opal, which is created only once a year. Others, however, insisted that it was a land deed of the Kingdom of Nieta. And the longer the rumors spread, the more people's attitudes toward Liliana changed. Now, people began to turn to the girl more and more often for political advice, and even gave her gifts. From the outside, it seems that these are just gifts, but in fact, they are ordinary bribes. However, among all the gifts, Liliana notices one interesting little box. Sophia reports that this was sent to the Empress from the Liston house. Our heroine understands that we are talking about the parents of the deceased Lady Caroline. To be more precise, the gift itself states that it is from the Marchioness of Liston. This woman, like her husband, had long since lost any interest in life after the death of her daughter. Therefore, it is very strange to receive a gift from people who live like recluses. Liliana has many questions about this as she examines the brooch she was given. At this point, Sophia announces that she has finished making the gift list, and Liliana decides to discuss the issue of how Duke Gabriel is trying to prevent the naturalization of Marquis Raquel. His Majesty put the matter on hold, and the Duke became so desperate that he began coming to the Emperor every day. But the strange thing is that Helio hasn't made any decision yet, and the Marquis, in the event of successful naturalization, plans to trade black opals in the Empire. Sophia thinks that this is why the nobles do not oppose naturalization. In this case, Liliana decides to send back all gifts that are not a gesture of goodwill. Small gifts from nobles are okay, but sending fresh produce is a completely different story. At this point, the head maid asks for permission to clarify this situation. She reports that arson is a rich territory, even though it is located on the border. Other countries exert influence on this state, and they are interested in the naturalization of the Marquis. After all, if Raquel is refused, he will lose his position. He will have no weight either in the kingdom of Nieta or in the empire. Since Raquel's trading company is connected to Arsène, they will all suffer huge losses. Therefore, the one who desperately sends Liliana the most gifts of fresh produce is Lord Arsène. Our heroine is very surprised that the head maid intervened and clarified the situation. She was always diligent and was assigned to watch over the Empress for Helio. But the fact that the maid has now shared the information is clearly a good sign. Liliana thanks the girl and says that this information will be useful for Hosden. The problem with the naturalization of the Marquise Raquel can be compared to a time bomb. It could detonate at any moment and affect many people. But Liliana cannot remain inactive, fearing the arrival of this moment. Therefore, the girl decides to prepare for any possible outcome. Liliana spends the next morning in the office with her tutor. Now Hosden will teach her all subjects. This is what the Emperor decided, to whom she had praised her teacher the previous night. Liliana is very ashamed that because of her, Hosden now has a lot of work. But she really admires the tutor, who is not afraid to be strict with her. And Hosden explains that there is nothing shameful in a student's sincere desire to learn. If this is the reason for the Emperor's order, then he has no objections. And since he is now teaching the girl all the etiquette lessons, she should stop constantly apologizing. Liliana did not expect such a harsh reproach, but immediately agrees with it. However, Hosden adds that it is also worth stopping being embarrassed. A member of the imperial family must behave with dignity, and with a confident look, our heroine promises to improve. But Hosden also explains that one should not respond so cheerfully. After this, he decides to start by checking homework on the topic of naturalization, but the maid interrupts them. The woman asks for forgiveness and reports that the Emperor has ordered his wife to appear in the audience hall. Liliana is shocked and realizes that the time bomb is about to explode. The girl apologizes to the teacher for interrupting their lesson. However, Hosden is in no hurry to let the student go so quickly. The man explains that he will escort the Empress to the audience hall. Liliana never expected that the tutor would want to wait for the girl at the entrance. An outstanding scholar like him should not serve a student. But Hosden thinks this is nonsense, since first of all he wants to hear what Liliana will say in the hall in front of everyone. Moreover, he gave her an assignment on the topic of the naturalization of the Marquis Raquel. And this hearing will be an excellent opportunity to learn the students' conclusions. Liliana thinks for a moment, as this is a matter that needs to be handled with care. But she agrees to let Hosden escort her to the audience hall. Liliana has no doubt that everyone will try to evaluate her abilities, and Hosden wants to see how capable his student is. After long and anxious thoughts, Liliana finally reaches the hall. She is so nervous that she feels like she is going to throw up. Hosden notices that the girl has lost her breath and advises her to control it. Whatever the circumstances, she must never let the enemy see that she is afraid. After these words, Liliana takes a deep breath and evens out her breathing. Then, with a confident gait, our heroine enters the audience hall. Everyone around greets the Empress consort with bated breath. Thanks to Hosden's advice, the girl looks calm and confident. Liliana thought about what she couldn't let others see, what she was afraid of. Although the girl was not born charismatic, she decides to use other ways to achieve what she wants. At this moment, she stops near a person who evokes negative emotions in her. It turns out to be Duke Gabriel, who is just waiting for the girl to fail. But if there's one thing Liliana has mastered to perfection, it's portraying an innocent smile. After this, the Emperor announces that his wife has finally joined those present. He turns to Empress Liliana, whom everyone has been waiting for so long. Helio asks the girl not to stand there like a pillar, as if she were a stranger. The Emperor wants his wife to come even closer to him. Liliana is a little puzzled, as she is already standing at the closest possible distance, and yet she does not dare to disobey her husband's request and takes a couple of steps forward. Then she decides to address her husband according to all the rules of etiquette. However, the Emperor explains that he does not hear the girl at all. As if mockingly, the man asks to come even closer to him. Liliana is ready to sink into the ground from such shame that Helio allows himself. In a formal setting like today, this distance is the norm, But since the Empress's position is vacant, and Helio said that he could not hear her, no one will try to interfere. Therefore, Liliana decides to obey her husband and come closer. She doesn't know why he did this, but if this situation amuses him, then it's worth playing along. After our heroine takes a few more steps, Helio asks what she has been doing. The Empress replies that she was in class, as she still doesn't know much about Carlo's empire. Since His Majesty's orders come first, the girl interrupted her studies. At this point, everyone present does not understand where this conversation is leading, and Helio reports that because of these activities, they almost stopped seeing each other. Liliana promises that she will try to find more time for her husband. While these two are discussing all sorts of nonsense, the Duke can't wait for the most important part to begin. He decides to cough in order to somehow distract His Majesty and attract his attention. Then Gabriel announces that it is time to move on to discussing the main issue. The Duke approaches the Empress and asks if she is aware of Raquel's request for naturalization. Liliana replies that she knows about it, and then Gabriel decides to accuse her of having a close relationship with the Marquise. After all, the princess comes from Nieta, and Raquel is a hereditary nobleman from the same kingdom. How then do we know that these two are not conspiring against the empire? Liliana is greatly disturbed by this accusation and explains that she had no contact with the Marquise while she lived in the kingdom. Moreover, the Duke has no evidence to support this statement. A wicked smile appears on Gabriel's face, as he has something to show for it. The man represents a person who is ready to testify against Liliana. This girl is going to tell about the secret meeting between the Empress and Marquis Raquel. Liliana recalls that there were many maids around when she was given an important item, and one of them was Lena, who is today testifying against her. Our heroine suspected something was wrong, even when she suddenly asked for a day off. She even gave the girl money for travel expenses and wished her luck. Liliana wonders why Lena is here if her relative is sick. And Duke Gabriel reports that this maid discovered something unusual just recently. After this, Lena says that the Empress secretly met with the Marquis and ordered all the maids to keep quiet about it. At that moment, she was helping the lady and personally observed the entire conversation. And contrary to Liliana's statements, the two communicated as acquaintances. Marquis Raquel even called the Empress princess and smiled broadly. Liliana explains that he is still a citizen of Nieta, and that is why he addressed the girl in this way. If Lena really wants to tell the truth, then she should have heard that the girl clarified this point during the conversation. After this performance created by the Duke, Helio begins to smile. The Empress really studies hard and knows etiquette better than others. At this moment, Duke Gabriel was ready to burst with anger, and Lena adds that Marquis Raquel made a gift to Her Highness. Those present have questions about whether Liliana actually received a bribe. Our heroine understands that to everyone, this gift really did look like a bribe, and His Majesty watches with suspicion how the girl will behave. Liliana realizes that she won't be able to ask Helio for help, because if she does this, no one will take her seriously, and all her work will become meaningless. Helio knows this, and therefore silently watches his wife's actions. However, she knows that the Emperor is confident that she can handle it herself. After this, the heroine replies that the item that the Marquise gave her is with her. Even the Duke froze in surprise and did not expect such a statement from the Empress. At this moment, the girl takes out an envelope and says that this is the letter that Raquel gave her that day. Gabriel asks to show the contents of the letter to everyone present. Liliana explains that it was written by her biological mother, Countess Marianne. And after handing over the letter, our heroine and the Marquis talked a little about Nieta, without discussing politics. Liliana understands that she now needs to make this letter public, but she is terribly ashamed. She asks that only the Emperor read it, as she does not want to make personal information public, and Gabriel speaks out against it. However, His Majesty accepts his wife's request and promises to report if he sees anything suspicious. After this, the servant hands the Emperor an envelope, and everyone freezes in anticipation. Helio opens the letter and carefully reads every word. All this time, Duke Gabriel is waiting for the moment when the Emperor will find at least some hint of a political conspiracy, and Liliana is just waiting for this whole nightmare to end. Suddenly, the Emperor's gaze becomes serious and focused. He approaches the Empress with suspicion and asks if this is all true. Our heroine tenses up and remembers that there shouldn't have been anything unusual in the letter. The Emperor asks the girl to come to him, and panic arises among the people, since only the Empress can stand nearby. In this case, Helio explains that according to this order, Turnus is his Empress, but people explain that the assistant is an exception, and His Majesty clings to this formulation. Since an exception can be made in this regard, nothing will happen if Liliana approaches him. After Helio has settled all the formalities, our heroine decides to obey his request. In front of everyone, she does something that no one has ever been allowed to do. The girl climbs the steps and stands directly in front of the emperor's throne. At this point, the man shows his wife the letter and asks if it is true. It says that her mother was recently given a mansion in the capital, so she remembered how, as a child, Liliana kept falling down the stairs and had to lay down a soft carpet. But she is afraid that when her daughter sees the soft carpet, she will ask to be left to sleep right on the stairs. After reading, the emperor waits for confirmation of whether the girl really did keep falling down the stairs. Liliana blushes with shame and explains that she was just a child then. But Helio is sure that if the Duchess is still worried about this, then it was not at such a young age. At the same time, the mother wrote that she remembered the letter that her daughter had written for her in childhood. Since she forbade teaching her to write, Liliana invented her own letters. After this, the emperor announces that he also wants to receive such a letter. But Liliana tries to justify herself by saying that she was very little then. However, from Helio's look, it is clear that he will not back down from this idea. Liliana agrees to write a short letter, but the emperor wants it to be 3 pages long. At this moment, our heroine begins to look at the man with hatred. And yet, in front of everyone, she has to say that she will do as he asks. This letter clearly shows Helio that the Empress was bright and energetic as a child. It also helped him understand why the Empress Dowager treasured her daughter-in-law so much. That's why Helio wants Liliana to freely exchange letters with her mother. And our heroine explains that she had to act covertly so as not to cause problems for the emperor. His Majesty praises his wife for her modesty and allows her to freely exchange letters with her mother. It is impossible to describe how happy Liliana felt after this, now that it has become clear that the Marquise and the Empress have nothing in common. The girl can be released. Our heroine is very glad that the situation ended well for her. She thanks His Majesty and descends the steps from his throne. The girl passes by the Duke, who still hasn't achieved what he wanted. Gabriel became even more embittered at the Empress, who was constantly getting under his feet. After this, Liliana and her companions are free to leave the audience hall. Our heroine decides that this is all over and is about to breathe a sigh of relief. However, Hasdan reminds her that she is still being watched and it is too early to relax. And when they return and take a little rest, they will continue their studies again. After all, if you missed today's lessons, you'll have to increase your workload tomorrow. Of course, Liliana initially liked her teacher's strictness, but this was too much. 5 days later, Helio overruled the objections of the upper class and granted permission for naturalization. But in exchange, Raquel had to renounce the title of Marquise and accept the title of Count. He also donated half of his Manastone mines to the empire. All these conditions left Count Raquel no chance to betray Carlo's empire. And after some time, Helio demanded that she give him what Liliana had promised to do. He talks about a 3-page letter that contains fictitious letters. But the problem is that Liliana remembered this only now. And yet it is strange that Helio came to her 6 days later, only because of the letter. Liliana can't quite understand why His Majesty needed it. After all, back then, she was a child who had not been taught to read or write. So she simply drew on the paper with scribbles that looked more like a drawing. But the emperor does not give in and demands that his wife draw him the same letter. He demands to bring a pen and paper, but Liliana stops Sophia. Our heroine even sticks her tongue out at the emperor, whose order she just cancelled. Then she repeats to Sophia again that she should not bring a pen and paper. However, Helio continues to stand his ground and gives Liliana a little more time. And since the girl is making up excuses, it means she definitely remembers what she wrote then. Our heroine agrees with this and explains that she put her whole soul into it back then. Helio falls silent for a moment, as if waiting for the story to continue. While Liliana does not react in any way, the emperor demands to know what was written in the letter. The girl promises to do this if her husband does not feel sorry for her later. For a moment, our heroine even feels sad from the memories. She asks the emperor to consider this to be just a silly story from childhood. At that time, our heroine was apparently 6 years old and still little. One day, the nanny brought Liliana a collection of interesting poems. After this, the woman read these poems to the girl every day before bed. Although this job brought her almost no money, the nanny still bought a book of poems every month. Liliana is sure that the woman wanted to teach the girl all the delights of literature. However, not everything in this story was as rosy as it might seem. When the girl was 6 years old, her nanny told her a short poem. She only did it once, but Liliana memorized the poem perfectly. Afterwards, she told it from memory to her mother over dinner. It is impossible to convey how scared the woman was then. In an ordinary family, having such a brilliant child would be a cause for joy. But since Liliana was an abandoned princess, this could have resulted in her death. No matter how much her mother risked her life, she could not guarantee the safety of her daughter's life. Therefore, in such a cruel place, the woman decided to burn all the books. After that day, Mom forbade teaching Liliana anything related to reading and writing. Those who didn't know the truth considered the heroine to be just a backward princess. But Liliana desperately wanted to study because she dreamed of writing a letter to her mother. She wanted to share how well her daughter could memorize poems, so she came up with her own letters at age 9. The girl drew small symbols to make her mother change her mind and allow her to learn to read and write. Eventually, the woman gave in and began teaching Liliana to read and write herself. But the funniest thing is that no one noticed what talent the girl had. In the end, the mother's fears for her daughter turned out to be completely unfounded. However, Helio is sure that in this story the situation is completely different. If you think strategically, the girl's mother decided to teach her to write exactly when the time was right. Of course, Liliana's readiness also helped, but it was not the main reason. The emperor is even curious why his wife didn't figure this out herself. After all, if she had learned to read at the age of 6, someone would have definitely noticed it. And if people found out about Liliana's genius, it would not work to her advantage. Then the girl would definitely be in danger in front of people who don't like competitors. But a child who only learned to read at the age of 9 is hardly worthy of attention. That's why Mom made it look like Liliana was having a hard time studying. And this shows that the woman did not give up, and thus protected her daughter. Even if Liliana had not drawn the symbols then, her mother would still have started teaching her to write and read. Our heroine had never thought about this, and Helio suggests writing a letter to her mother to find out everything firsthand. Liliana is very grateful to her husband for allowing her to exchange letters, and he expects her gratitude in the form of scribbles. However, seeing the man's outstretched palm, the girl does not understand his hint and simply places her hand on top. Then she realizes that she has clearly done something wrong and abruptly removes her wrist. But at that moment, Helio manages to stop the girl and grabs her hand. Every touch of the emperor seems exciting to Liliana. After this, the man brings his wife's hand to his lips and kisses it. Our heroine freezes in surprise and shock, and a blush appears on her cheeks. Then Helio asks if Liliana is now allowing him to hold her hand. The girl tries to justify herself by saying that she did it only because the emperor asked her to. And he smiles and comes to the conclusion that now Liliana is just ready to give him her hand. After this, the man lets our heroine go so as not to embarrass her. For Liliana's peace of mind, he adds that he is ready to leave everything as it is. The girl presses her hands to her chest and agrees with her husband. After a while, this long day ends and evening comes. Liliana lies down on her bed and thinks over all the events in her head. She decides to ask Sophia why His Majesty is so interested in her. The maid replies that the emperor sees himself in the girl. After all, they both value their mothers very much and yet can hardly talk to them. But Liliana isn't sure that this is enough for him to be so kind to her, and Sophia reminds her mistress that the emperor has the right to change his mind at any moment. Therefore, she asks Liliana not to rely on him and not to get too attached. Our heroine understands that Sophia is right, but she is also glad that the emperor feels a sense of kinship towards her, because thanks to this, she will be able to live a little longer than in the original. And yet one should not rely only on Helio and his authority. Moreover, part of Liliana is still unhappy that she has to seek safety from the emperor. A few days later, the girl meets Count Raquel in his reception room. She thanks the man for giving her a letter from her mother. At the same time, she is interested in why the count gave up most of his wealth and became a citizen of the empire. Although Raquel had indeed risked a lot, all these riches were not particularly dear to him. The man puts his drink on the table and decides to be frank with Liliana. The thing is that for him, the kingdom of Nita is like rotten water in a dark cave. the current government rejects talents, completely ignoring them. The kingdom also exploits its population through backbreaking labor, and Nieta relies solely on her underground reserves of mana stones. At the same time, the king has no intention of trying to develop truly. Raquel tried to do everything he could and tried to find goods to import other than stones. He also sought opportunities to stimulate the domestic market in order to reduce the gap between the capital and the territories. Several times, the count distributed grain from his own storehouses to people to help them cope with the famine. However, Raquel is not omnipotent, and his capabilities are not limitless. He was a simple count from the western provinces, without much power. After this, Liliana guesses that Raquel met with the king of Nieta. And indeed, the man asked him for help in his endeavors, aimed at the good of the kingdom. But the king only smiled and said that Raquel had done a great job, and for his efforts, he would receive the title of Marquise. And after that, he sent him back to the west and did nothing more. After this story, Liliana understands how the count became a marquise. She had no idea that such things were happening behind the scenes. The king not only did not accept the work, but also turned his intentions into a greedy desire to obtain a new noble title for himself. After this, Raquel makes it clear to Liliana that Nieta needs a new leader, and her future child would be suitable for this. However, no one yet knows that our heroine is not going to have children. Seeing the girl's doubts, the count understands that the girl herself has set her sights on the imperial throne. Our heroine is speechless at this incorrect assumption. Then she rushes to convince the man that this is not the case at all. Liliana explains that she doesn't even dare think about the imperial throne. Raquel looks closely at the girl, and then at the people behind her. He sees two maids there who might have misinterpreted his words. After this, the count explains that it is not necessary for one of Liliana's children to become the heir. He simply wants to support someone who can build on the foundation he has laid in the kingdom. And before moving on to discussing cooperation, Raquel would like to show the Empress a few things. As proof of his abilities, he brought a business plan. Liliana is surprised that Raquel shows her such important documents. But the count shows only a small part of everything, and the girl can even tell the emperor about it. However, Liliana must remember one important thing in this matter. One day, a crisis will inevitably arise, and the situation around will change. The thought of the impending events makes Liliana feel uneasy. She then asks the count whether he still considers himself a citizen of Nieta. But the man says that he considers himself a citizen of the country whose inhabitants do not starve. This answer undoubtedly touched the heart of our heroine, and the girl hopes that Count Raquel really thinks so. That same evening, Liliana still couldn't forget about this conversation. According to Raquel's business plan, he plans to use the gemstones he already has. In addition, the man wants to popularize rare types of tea leaves. He also plans to develop sales of coffee, which is not particularly popular in the empire. Count Raquel said he changed the way he roasted the coffee beans, but Liliana still thought it was a bit bitter. At this point, Sophia asks if the lady would like to go to bed. Liliana agrees and asks the maid to ask the emperor if she can meet him tomorrow. And the count's words about how a crisis would inevitably come one day kept swirling around in the girl's head. But she is frightened by the fact that behind Helio's back, she is increasing her power. If the emperor catches her doing this, it's scary to imagine what his face will be like. After this, Liliana goes to bed, but sleep doesn't come to her because of the coffee she drank. Our heroine decides to ask Sophia to bring her some tea that helps her sleep. A few minutes later, the maid brings tea, which was recently brought to the empire. Liliana smells the wonderful aroma of an expensive drink and takes a sip. Suddenly, our heroine realizes that something is wrong with this tea. Liliana becomes incredibly ill and begins to cough heavily. And at this moment, the mug of tea falls to the floor and breaks into pieces. Our heroine is not getting better, and blood begins to ooze from her mouth. Gradually, the empress stops making sounds and moving. The girl falls onto the bed, and Sophia panics and demands that a doctor be brought. After some time, the doctor reports to the emperor, standing at his wife's bedside, that it was poison. Traces of it were found in the tea that Her Highness drank. Fortunately, the dose of poison was minimal, and regular doses of antidote should cure the girl. Another odd thing was that it was a poison called Hippelius. It was very difficult to obtain, as it is rare in the empire. At this point, the emperor wonders who served his wife this tea. Sophia honestly admits that it was she who brought the drink to the lady. But Helio understands that the maid is not stupid enough to poison Liliana. Therefore, he is interested in who gave the tea to the Empress in the first place. After this, Sophia replies that it was Count Raquel. This information about the Count greatly intrigues His Majesty. Now the Emperor clearly understands what really happened. From that moment on, he orders the palace to be guarded and forbids anyone to leave it. Also, everyone except the Empress lying in bed must leave this room. After this, all the servants leave the bedroom. But Helio remains next to her. Before leaving, Sophia looks at His Highness with concern. Then the doors close, and the Emperor is left alone with his wife. He thinks that, based on all the information, the most likely culprit is Count Raquel. But he's not a fool and wouldn't expose himself so obviously. This means that the real criminal was the one who needed to deal a double blow to the Empress and the Count. In other words, the Gabriels were much more desperate than Helio had imagined. Poisoning a member of the imperial family will have serious consequences. Since they were unable to prevent Raquel's naturalization, they decided to exclude the possibility of his union with the Empress. The first thing Helio decides to do is to prevent the spread of rumors and find out who exactly mixed the poison. Then, it will be possible to attribute the Empress's poor health to stress in order to avoid being set up by Raquel, and force Duke Gabriel to become a victim of public censure. However, the Emperor is not satisfied that this is all he can do for Liliana. All this time he tried to help the girl, but the Duke is still walking free, and she lies on the bed dying and does not regain consciousness. After this, the Emperor decides to paint a complete picture of events, where Liliana is only a small piece of the puzzle. It won't be easy without her, but a sudden deterioration in her condition won't affect the whole picture. In fact, even if the girl had died, the painting would have remained intact. However, this little puzzle colors all the others. And it turns out that Liliana becomes the meaning of this picture. No matter how hard the Emperor tried to contain his emotions, he was still drawn to this girl. He puts his hand to her face and notices how her fingers begin to tremble. This feeling of fear and attachment to his wife greatly frightens a man. He immediately removes his hand and does not understand what is happening to him. After this, Helio abruptly gets out of bed and tries to take control of his emotions. The Emperor decides that he cannot give in to his emotions so much. If he allows any more feelings to show towards the Empress, everything could go wrong. Helio decides to leave, but before doing so, he turns his head towards the girl. At this time, Liliana still lies unconscious on the brink of life and death. Despite his attempts to contain his feelings, Helio cannot control his compassion for the Empress. Late at night, Liliana opens her eyes and comes to her senses. Usually, her palace is very quiet, but after the tragedy, Helio assigned many maids. However, that night, it became as quiet as before again, and only Sophia was next to Liliana. The rustling sound wakes the maid up, and she discovers that her mistress has come to her senses. At this point, Liliana wonders how long she slept. Sophia reports that a whole day has passed, and the lady has been unconscious all this time. Seeing the Empress's condition, the maid decides to urgently call a doctor. She promises to return soon, and Liliana doesn't even have time to stop her. In fact, the girl was trying to say that she was fine. Left completely alone in the room, Liliana turns her attention to the window. After this, the girl gets out of bed and heads towards the balcony. All this time, Liliana thinks that she didn't even understand how it all happened. Yesterday, she definitely drank poisoned tea and collapsed unconscious. She almost died, although she tried to be very careful. However, this did not help her find herself on the brink of life and death. Liliana goes out onto the balcony and sees her palace guarded by the Emperor's knights. At this moment, Sophia and the doctor enter the room, advising the girl to be careful and not to overexert herself. And Liliana asks the maid to tell her why the walls of her palace are guarded by knights. In response, the girl hears that the Emperor ordered them to stand near the house. However, His Majesty never explained why he did this. Liliana realizes that instead of keeping an eye on the Duke, Helio has decided to put her under surveillance. The Emperor knows that his wife was poisoned and apparently wants to protect Gabriel's family, so he does this in order to keep the Duke in check. But for some reason, the Emperor does not want to get rid of the root of the problem. This realization and the many questions that arise make the girl feel hopeless. At that moment, the man's voice begins to echo in her head. Liliana even turns around, as she thinks that Helio is calling her, but in reality, only a maid and a doctor are near her. Sophia asks the lady not to overexert herself and let the doctor examine her. Liliana agrees and goes back to bed. All this time, she thinks that she can no longer rely on Helio and needs to find protection for herself. After a few days, Liliana feels better and can already walk in the garden. The girl greets this morning in the gazebo with tea brewed for her. At this moment, our heroine notices something strange. Among the maids, she sees a girl who greatly interests her. After the poisoning incident, Liliana entrusted Sophia with one important task. She asked her to contact Baal Gabriel without anyone knowing about it. Although Sophia advised her to first fully recover, Liliana could no longer delay. After all, our heroine needs to increase her strength as quickly as possible. Sophia was very glad that the lady made the right choice. Although His Majesty was kind to Liliana, the maid still really wanted her not to rely on his fleeting affections. Our heroine decided to choose Baal, since Raquel would ask her in return for what he wanted. But Liliana is not going to do this and show uncharacteristic selfishness, and so the girl decided to start with what she could currently do. In the end, Sophia found a girl who does not receive direct orders from His Majesty. She turned out to be a servant who had only recently started serving in the palace. She's great at being scared and confused. A big plus is that it is also responsible for waste disposal. When the waste needs to be disposed of again, the maid can leave the palace and deliver the letter to Baal. There is just one more problem that needs to be solved somehow. To give a letter to a maid, you need to somehow slip it in without the other maids noticing. At this moment, Liliana takes out an envelope and watches the head maid out of the corner of her eye. After this, she carefully places the letter under the tray. Liliana decides that if she leaves the letter on the table, then the maid can pick it up when no one is around. All this time, it seems to her that the head maid did not suspect anything. As our heroine heads into the room, she thinks about how she can reward the girl. Suddenly, the head maid decides to turn to her mistress. She takes out that same envelope in front of Liliana and tells her that she forgot it on the table. Our heroine is shocked by her discovery and tries not to show her emotions, and the head maid reports that her guess turned out to be correct. But how can the Empress be so careless in such matters? After all, entrusting something so important to a maid she barely knows is reckless. This maid could have taken the letter to His Majesty or Count Raquel. After this, the head maid falls silent, as she realizes that she has gone too far. She asks to be punished for daring to raise her voice to the Empress. The girl sits on her knees and waits for Liliana to do it. However, our heroine has no intention of fulfilling her request. Liliana asks to stop this, as this situation is unpleasant for her. In her kingdom, all the maids were like family to the girl. After these words, the chief maid decides to apologize to the Empress. She promises that this will not happen again, and that she will think carefully about her behavior. And in exchange for forgiveness, the maid is ready to prove her loyalty. After this, Liliana asks the girl to stand up and answer a few questions. She then stands before the Empress and awaits her further instructions. Our heroine wonders if she can call the maid by her name, Manelli. The girl didn't expect that the lady would remember her real name. Liliana explains that she used to be afraid to call her by her name, and Manelli replies that the Empress should not be afraid of her subordinates. After this, the Empress receives confirmation that the maid is serving His Majesty. But then why didn't Manelli report this letter to the Emperor? To this, the maid replies that His Majesty ordered her to serve the Empress with full dedication. However, after the poisoning attempt, she realized one important thing. It was her complacency that prevented the tragedy. Liliana hastens to assure the girl that what happened was not her fault, but the head maid is convinced that she is responsible for protecting the palace, and therefore must be punished. However, neither His Majesty nor the Empress ever did this. Therefore, Manelli is ready to help Liliana in everything that will not harm the Emperor. Our heroine did not expect that the man Helio would be so sincere with her. If Manelli had wanted to deceive her, she would have said that her orders were above the Emperor's orders. She was also there all this time and helped the girl, albeit on Helio's orders. Having decided to trust the maid, Liliana gives her the letter and asks her not to tell anyone about it. Manelli replies that the Emperor also wants his wife to be with someone reliable, and this letter does not contradict his will. Having heard these words, Liliana is no longer afraid to say to whom this letter is addressed. The head maid takes the envelope in her hands and asks you to rely on her. After some time, our heroine continued to languish in anticipation. If the letter reached the recipient without any problems, then she should have already received a reply. At that moment, the girl hears a knock on the door and Manelli enters the room, bringing tea. She places the tray on the table and asks the lady to enjoy it, along with the buns. While the maid is talking about the dessert, Liliana discovers a letter underneath it. The girl thanks Manelli and asks to leave her alone to read a book. The headmaid leaves, and our heroine can calmly find out the answer from Bile. The girl decides not to delay and immediately opens the envelope. In the letter, she reads that Bile is willing to help her with an investigation outside the palace in exchange for his offer. He learned that public opinion was not currently threatening Liliana. In fact, most people believe that Duke Gabriel is the culprit of everything, but because of his great influence, people are afraid to talk about it openly. Therefore, however, they have long been leading a solitary life, and their influence has greatly weakened. Because of this, it is not certain that the Listons will be useful. As for the search for a powerful spiritual mage, nothing definitive can be said yet. Finding someone who can work secretly is quite difficult, but Bile promises to do everything possible to make this happen. After this, he will definitely contact the Empress and wish her to be freed from guards as soon as possible. Liliana ponders what she has read, where, in Gabriel's opinion, the Listons will be of little use. And yet, the gift she recently received does not give our heroine any peace. This brooch is clearly in good condition, meaning it was purchased quite recently. If the Listons had simply wanted to impress, they would have sent a new brooch. Or at least they could have included a letter with the old piece of jewelry explaining the tradition associated with it. So this brooch is a bait that is supposed to spark curiosity. That is why Liliana decides to meet with the Listons and calls the headmaid. The girl explains that she needs to meet His Majesty. The next day, our heroine goes to the palace to convince the emperor to relax his surveillance. Usually, it was Helio who came to see her, and not the other way around. Perhaps that is why the path to the imperial palace seems so unfamiliar to her. At this moment, Liliana notices something even more surprising on the road. She passes by the Empress's palace and the Ares palace. Ares is located closest to the imperial palace and was originally given to the young heroine of the novel. Helio even rebuilt the entire house to suit it, updating the outdated design. The man did not want his daughter to live in such an old building. He was so caring that he decided to place his daughter near him. After a long journey, Liliana finally arrives at her destination. The girl gets out of the carriage and enjoys the majestic view of the palace. After this, one of the maids announces that she is ready to escort the Empress to the office. This is very strange, since meetings are usually scheduled in the reception area or in a private room. After some time, the Emperor hears a knock on his door and allows the guests to enter. The door opens and the Emperor's legal wife appears before him. Helio pretends not to pay any attention to the girl. Liliana decides to greet her husband first and says that she needs to discuss something. Helio replies that he is very busy now and the Empress should get straight to the point. Our heroine is unpleasant to hear such a cold tone, but she expected it. After this, the girl asks the Emperor to stop watching her, and Helio replies that this is probably necessary so that she can meet with Gabriel's nephew and the Marquis of Liston, and he really didn't think that Liliana would ask his spy to deal with these issues. However, our heroine is sure that the Emperor is only trying to make her suspect Manelli. There are many eyes in the Emerald Palace, and anyone could spill the beans except the headmaid. After this, Helio replies that he sometimes forgets how smart Liliana is. But the girl does not agree with this, since she does not even know why she was locked in the Emerald Palace. However, instead of a clear answer, our heroine is faced with a wall of silence. It becomes clear that the Emperor is not going to answer this question. But Liliana really hopes that he will say something or cite a good reason for her imprisonment. Without hearing a single word, the girl reports that over all this time, they have become quite close. Helio agrees with this and explains that this is precisely why he will allow his wife to leave the room alive. These words make Liliana's heart beat wildly, but our heroine does not intend to remain silent after such treatment. The girl states that everyone tells her that the Emperor will one day abandon her, but she didn't expect that this day would come so soon, and that she really couldn't rely on her husband. Leaving Helio in his thoughts, Liliana decides to leave his office. Upset, she runs out of the room and almost knocks down the Emperor's assistant. After this, the office doors close and Helio is left alone. Now he is in complete silence and alone with his thoughts. At that moment, the image of Liliana and her sweet smile pops into his head. How could the girl think that he would leave her after all this? Although, perhaps that would have happened if Helio could have done it. Meanwhile, our heroine gets into the carriage and heads home. This unpleasant conversation left the girl feeling devastated. Helio's phrase about how he would let her leave this office alive kept running through her head. For the first time in all this time, the emperor was so cold and cruel to her. This is probably how he wanted to warn his wife that she had reached her limit. But he promised to take responsibility. And in the end, he simply locked Liliana away while her enemy walked free. At this moment, Turns notices that the emperor's wife has completely fallen apart. Liliana herself feels embarrassed that her tears won't stop. In order to help somehow, the man offers the girl his scarf. Although this is not usually accepted, Liliana decides to agree. At this time, Turns asks not to pay attention to him and says that he will just look out the window. Liliana thanks the man and promises to buy him a new scarf. But Turns asks the empress not to worry about it and not to return anything. After all, a true gentleman should always have a handkerchief for the ladies. After these words, Liliana says that Turns is probably very popular among girls. But the man is confident that His Majesty is much more popular than him. Our heroine decides to take advantage of the moment and asks if the emperor is always so cold with women. Turns explains that in reality, his behavior is 1,000 times worse. He is sometimes even so stern that his assistant is ashamed to be in the same room with him. Undoubtedly, these words console our heroine a little after an unpleasant conversation. Returning to the emperor, Turns reports that Her Highness was crying. It seems that the husband has upset the girl a lot, but he doesn't care much about it. Helio is confident that something similar will happen again in the future. He also wonders if Turns gave the empress his handkerchief. The assistant decides to put on an innocent face and says that he didn't do it. After all, he would be a complete fool if he answered this question honestly. But guessing the real truth, the emperor decides to load his assistant with work. He gives him mountains of documents and demands that they be sorted out by tomorrow morning. Turns realizes that Helio knows about the handkerchief and explains that he simply wanted to console the empress. However, His Majesty does not care about the excuses, and he sends his assistant to work. But approaching the door, Turns decides to speak out to the emperor. He doesn't understand why he takes it out on him, even though he himself is dishonest. This accusation leaves Helio speechless for a moment. Turns decides not to anger the emperor even more, and immediately runs out of the office. In the end, Helio is left alone, having lost this verbal duel. But thoughts about the empress and her safety haunt him. Since work is no longer an option, Helio decides to get up from the table. He takes a few steps to get his thoughts in order. Apparently, Turns' words made the man think seriously. Although what was said struck a chord with Helio, there was still some truth in it. Now, all he thinks about is that he must not get close to the empress. Still, he had to do something to protect her. Meanwhile, the situation in the Emerald Palace remains the same. The knights continue to guard Liliana and do not let anyone out of the palace. However, for some reason, one of the men suddenly starts sneezing right at his post. At this time, Liliana and Sophia are watching this from the balcony. The maid praises her mistress for this ingenious little prank. Life in the palace became so boring that Liliana used spiritual magic to make the knight sneeze. Chuchu is pleased that the girl is making more and more progress in wind magic. They say that spirits love to play pranks, and it seems to be true. When Liliana returned from meeting with Helio, she didn't want to do anything. At first, she didn't even eat anything, but then she decided that this couldn't go on forever. Instead of being sad, the girl focused on what she could do. The first thing she did was to continue learning spiritual magic. And of course, the textbooks helped her a lot, improving her knowledge and skills. Although Liliana's successes have become clear, she wants to achieve even more. Suddenly, the girl notices a truly strange picture in her palace. Our heroine suddenly stands next to the edge of the balcony, and Sophia freezes in horror. She abruptly grabs the lady's hand and asks her to be careful. It turns out that Liliana was surprised by Turns' appearance at the palace. The girl doesn't understand why he's here and why he's talking to the knights. Could it be that Helio sent him here to tell her something? From these thoughts and hope for the best, Liliana's heart begins to beat wildly. However, after talking with the knight, turns around and leaves the palace. It turns out that the emperor's assistant did not come to Liliana at all. Sophia notices that the empress's face has changed greatly. Upset, Liliana leaves the balcony and says that she is fine. She lies down on the bed again and covers herself with a blanket so as not to see anyone. Sophia realizes that depression has once again approached the Empress. Suddenly, the head maid enters the room and announces that the captain of the nightly squad has requested a meeting. It seems that this meeting is somehow connected with the arrival of the Emperor's assistant. After this, Liliana tidies herself up and goes to talk to the captain. The man informs the Empress that His Majesty has issued a decree and the girl can move freely. Their squad was also ordered to complete their mission in the palace. But Liliana still hopes that besides this, she will hear at least something else about the Emperor. She wonders why they were even watching the palace and why they gave any explanation. However, the captain cannot answer all of Her Highness's questions. Unfortunately, our heroine never received any information. Once in her room, Liliana collapses on her pillow. She is infuriated by the behavior of the Emperor, who left her in the dark. The maids are very worried about their mistress, who is about to burst into tears. They try to distract the girl somehow and suggest taking a walk in the garden. Liliana thanks the maids and apologizes for throwing the pillow. But Manelli is not offended and offers the lady to throw the cup if it will make her feel better. One day, the man she used to serve actually threw a cup at her. She got this scar on her hand right after this incident. Liliana recalls with horror that Manelli's previous owner was His Majesty. However, the maid hastens to reassure her mistress and explains that at that time, she served the previous empress. Liliana promises that she will never hurt her like that and asks her to stay as long as His Majesty allows it. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Sophia decides to suggest a walk outside again. The girl happily announces that she will help the Empress prepare for her exit. Such sincere and warm care from the maids helps Liliana feel better. After some time, the girl goes down to the exit of the palace and discovers something strange. There used to be another maid here, but now there isn't one. It turns out that this girl has been missing since this morning, and perhaps she is lost again. The new maid promises that she will definitely reprimand her as soon as she returns. After this, Liliana goes out into the garden and decides to ask Manelli a question. However, immediately after this, our heroine for some reason changes her mind. Seeing the lady's doubts, Manelli promises not to say anything to His Majesty. Liliana thanks the girl and still decides to keep a secret with her. She finds it strange that the missing maid goes missing so often. Every day, the maids take the same routes when they work. It turns out that the maid was never actually lost. She walked around the area, and if she was caught, she would justify herself by saying that she was lost. On the day she went missing, Helio removed surveillance from the palace because she was the one who poisoned the tea. Now, there was no one left in the palace who could escape, and this explains the departure of the knights. But if the goal was to protect Duke Gabriel, then the guard could have been relaxed, and the criminal would have been allowed to escape. Or perhaps the criminal was needed in order to completely control the Duke's family. And yet, Liliana decides to stop thinking about someone as heartless as Helio. It's better to take advantage of the fact that the girl is no longer under surveillance. After this, Liliana asks the maid to tell Hasdan that they are resuming their training. A few days later, our heroine is once again enjoying walks in the picturesque garden. It would seem that on such a serene day, nothing should happen. However, suddenly, Liliana begins to hear strange sounds, similar to laughter. The girl decides to ask Sophia, but she doesn't hear anything. The maid begins to worry about her mistress, with whom this has happened more than once. And Liliana remembers the time when she heard loud crying and found Choo-Choo for the first time. Since no one but her hears this sound, it means it's a matter of spirits. Liliana decides to go in the direction where she heard laughter and finds Hasdan there. To her surprise, the man was wet from head to toe. Hasdan asks not to come close to him, as he is soaking wet. He explains that all this happened because he fell into the pond and slipped. Liliana gives the teacher her glasses and can't believe he fell so awkwardly. It makes her laugh to realize that Hasdan is clumsy sometimes too. Our heroine suggests postponing the lesson for an hour so the man can tidy himself up. Hasdan apologizes and promises to try to come as soon as possible. And Liliana still continues to wonder what kind of strange laughter she heard. But after some time, no extraneous noises were heard in the palace. It was so calm and peaceful around that Liliana decided to read. However, Hasdan's fall into the pond seems a little strange to our heroine. If the man really did end up in the water, then why are the stones around him completely dry? Although who knows, maybe they have already dried in the sun. At this moment, Hasdan returns to the student earlier than she thought. The man explains that today's lesson will be devoted to the history of aristocratic families. They will discuss which family has the longest history and which has the greatest wealth. At the same time, it will be interesting to know which family gave the world the largest number of scientists. Noticing the student's thoughtfulness, Hasdan decides that she has some kind of question. At this point, Liliana explains that she would like to know about the relationship between the Gabriels and the Arsène territory, but she is even more interested in the current state of affairs of the Liston family in the Empire. Hasdan is surprised by this question, but decides to tell everything. The Gabriel family does not have a very long history in the Empire. The Listons, on the other hand, trace their roots back to the times when the Empire was a kingdom. They also owned several territories in the fertile and warm south. Due to the lack of male heirs in their families, women often became heads of households. If it weren't for that tragedy, the next leader of the Listons would again have been a woman. Caroline was their only daughter, and after her death, there would be no one to look after the territories in the future. Therefore, the Marquise and Marchioness of Liston decided to return the lands to the Empire. However, the imperial family promised to return these territories back when the Listons recovered emotionally. But they are still silent, and their current capital should only be enough for a carefree life for a while. And if they don't take the land, the Liston family will definitely go into decline. If you can get them out of their seclusion, they can become powerful allies. Liliana explains that she is planning to win the Listons over to her side. Then, Hasdan decides to ask why the girl chose this particular family. The thing is, our heroine doesn't have enough support, and she can't force someone to act without a good reason. Then, Hasdan advises the student to first find out if the Listons are really willing to do something for her. The girl explains that she has a chance and takes a gift out of her pocket. She hands over the Liston brooch, which was a kind of token. Hasdan opens the box and carefully examines the gift. After this, he confirms that there really is a chance. An old brooch in a simple box speaks of caution. Perhaps they did not want to leave any traces of their purchase of the jewelry in order to secretly contact the Empress. After this, Hasdan asks Liliana's opinion about what the public thinks of her. The girl replies that she is a princess from another country that doesn't mean anything special, but that's not the right answer. The man is sure that Liliana is a tender sprout, who is still unknown what she will grow into. And one day this sprout may suck all the juices from the mighty tree of the Gabriel family. The Listons will do anything if they are confident in their choice. Everyone in the Empire knows that this is connected with the death of their daughter, due to the fault of the Duke. And revenge on the Gabriel family will be the Listons' first priority. After all, they took away their only daughter and heir to the territories. Liliana agrees that the Listons will do anything. And to destroy Duke Gabriel and Visti, they will stop at nothing. A few days later, our heroine sets off on her journey in her carriage. She recently received a letter from Bile, in which he promised to help establish contact with the Listons. But before heading to the estate, she must meet Helio. The Emperor asks the girl to stay in the Emerald Palace, as people still think she is bedridden. However, Liliana suggests sending her to a resort to recover. She wants to use this as a public pretext to leave the palace and visit the Listons. After all, the Emperor needs a smokescreen to preserve the Empress's place. After such arguments, Helio agrees to help and promises to prepare a separate carriage that will go to the sanatorium. Liliana thanks her husband and decides to end their conversation. Finally, Helio asks her to keep quiet about the fact that she was poisoned. The girl says in a cold and offended tone that she knows her place. Liliana is still angry that the criminal was captured, and Helio remains cautious. As planned, our heroine reached a deserted place in the Imperial carriage, and then transferred to an inconspicuous one. The Imperial carriage went to the resort, and Liliana and Sophia went to the Listons. Although now our heroine would not mind a vacation at the sea. But first, I need to focus and finish more important things. After some time, Liliana reaches the place where the Marquise is already meeting her. The woman warmly greets the Empress and says that it is a great honor for her. It is clear that the Marchioness of Liston was eagerly awaiting the girl's arrival. Liliana is also very glad that she finally met the woman. For this event, our heroine even wore that very brooch. The Marquise immediately noticed this and did not expect that the Empress would decide to honor her in this way. The woman smiles sweetly and says that this brooch looks great on our heroine. After this, Madame Liston offers to escort Her Highness inside. Liliana heard that during the years she lived in seclusion, she almost stopped talking. But But Madame Liston turned out to be completely different from what was described. Our heroine goes inside, and the first thing that catches her eye are the expensive items. In the living room alone, one can already feel the former grandeur of the Listons. Liliana's attention is particularly drawn to a huge painting hanging on the wall. The owner of the house explains that their family made serious investments in the empire when it was first founded. This painting was given in recognition of their contribution, and Caroline admired it greatly. When she was little, she boasted that one day she would receive another such painting from the emperor. Madame Liston was always proud of her daughter and loved her. After this, the woman invites Liliana to sit down at the table. She has already prepared tea for her and is wiping the guest's cup in advance. Our heroine was a little stunned by such a gesture. Liliana realizes that the Marquise obviously knows about her poisoning. Apparently, Madame Liston wanted to reassure the Empress of her safety in this way. Instead of making her worry, the woman created a situation in which using poison would be impossible. But how did Madame Liston learn about the poisoning incident if she had been living in seclusion for many years? Most likely, someone is simply transmitting information from the world to her. But whatever the reason, thanks to her, Liliana can finally drink tea in peace. After this, the Empress reports that she was surprised by the gift of the brooch, considering the emotional recovery of the family. And Madame Liston replies that she can be useful and will not betray, for the sake of revenge on Wisty Gabriel. She also considers it a wise decision that the Empress contacted her through bile. However, she advises against relying too much on a person who bears the surname Gabriel. Once he gets what he wants, he can immediately betray. Unlike Madame Liston, Liliana decides to find out what role the woman has prepared for her in this revenge. After this question, the Marquise extends her hand and addresses the girl. She reveals that Liliana's role is to become Empress. No matter how great her power, if the Empress's place remains vacant, Visti will certainly take it. But if Liliana gets ahead of her, even the powerful Gabriel family will face difficulties. And our heroine explains that she wants the power that will allow her to protect herself, not harm herself. But the Marquise asks the girl not to worry about this issue. Her family will survive until Wisty Gabriel dies. After this, Liliana asks what the Listons can do for her. It turns out that the Marquise knows that the Empress is looking for a cure. At this moment, a slight tremor begins to run through Liliana's body. The Marquise explains that the girl has a very capable maid. Most wouldn't have even noticed her, but she came to her business. Liliana is surprised, because she heard that the Listons transferred all their property to the Empire. But the woman explains that grieving parents are not sitting idle, and while they lacked the strength to meet the Gabriels face-to-face, the Marquise acted through the enterprise. She acted from a place where no one could see her, and where she could see everyone. After this, Madame Liston takes out a book and asks Liliana to look at it. This is information about the Kurd Trading Company, which is the main source of income for the Gabriel family. And that's not all the information the Marquise has and can share. In return, the woman only asks for a man who can divert attention to himself while she operates in the shadows. Liliana explains that she needs to think things through so as not to make a frivolous decision. Madame Liston understands this and suggests that the girl first take a rest from the journey. The maids escort our heroine to a room where she is overwhelmed by many thoughts. If Liliana accepts this offer, she will have to cut ties with Bile. If only Hasdin were here now and could tell his student what to do. But worrying won't help matters. And first Liliana decides to get a good night's sleep. Already late at night, the girl begins to hear strange sounds in her sleep. This crying reminds her of the first time she met Choo-Choo. Is it possible that there is a spirit in this house that is also upset about something? After some thought, Liliana decides to check it out just in case. The girl descends through the dark corridors of the house and heads towards the sound of crying. She feels like a ghost could jump out at her at any moment. Liliana hears the sound getting closer and notices the door ajar. She carefully tries to get inside, although she doesn't even know if she's allowed to go in there. At this point, the voices become more and more distinct, and Liliana cannot believe her eyes. She sees before her Madame Liston, who is crying over the death of her daughter. In her hands, the woman holds a portrait that clearly belongs to the deceased Caroline. At first, Liliana decides not to go inside so as not to disturb the woman. However, it breaks my heart to see the pain Madame Liston is going through. After thinking for a bit, Liliana decides to enter the room. Seeing the girl, Madame Liston freezes in place with fear. Liliana apologizes for the sudden visit in the middle of the night. She also apologizes for entering the room without asking, but the woman herself decides to ask for forgiveness for allowing herself to be shown in such a state. After this, Liliana places the candle on the floor and sits down next to the marquise. She asks the woman for permission to comfort her. It might not help much, but Liliana still can't help but try. The marquise is glad that the girl did not leave her alone and asks her not to go. In fact, she was very lucky that Liliana was there, because her husband was completely exhausted by grief. He has become exactly as people describe him and looks like a walking corpse. But Liliana hastens to console the woman and explains that the Marquis has simply chosen seclusion, and Madame Liston decided to seek justice and avenge her daughter's death. In grief, everyone is equal, and there are no people who experience death more or less strongly than others. It seemed that these words greatly supported the Marquise, who had long dreamed of support. In tears, she falls into Liliana's arms, and her body begins to tremble. So simple words and hugs made the woman feel better. After this, the Marquise decides to assume that Liliana's mother misses her very much, and our heroine explains that her absence will benefit her loved one. After her departure, her mother was granted the title of Countess, and she was finally able to escape from the terrible palace. But Madame Liston is sure that if she had a chance to be with Caroline again, she would give up any title. After all, for a mother, there is nothing more important in the world than her own children. At this moment, our heroine begins to see her mother in the image of the Marquise. Because of the terrible melancholy and circumstances, tears well up in her eyes. The girl explains that she just wants her mother to be happy. These words and Liliana's tears deeply touch the Marquise's heart. She hastens to assure the girl that there is nothing wrong with these feelings. It's only natural to want the best for your loved ones. So the Marquise and our heroine chatted all night about their pressing concerns. Liliana's eyes were red in the morning because she had been crying until dawn. At this moment, one of the maids announces that she has urgent news. The carriage that was supposed to take the Empress to the resort got into an accident. One of the horses suddenly went wild, and the carriage crashed into a tree. Madame Liston has decided to look into the matter further and will have to tell her everything in detail when she returns. Liliana thanks the maid for the information and feels that there are many strange things about this accident. The harder she tries to survive, the tighter the ring of enemies closes around her. At this rate, she might die even earlier than the original story says. But since she is not destined to live her life to the end anyway, it no longer matters when exactly she dies. However, Liliana decides to move on, and Sophia finds a resemblance between the hair of the heroine in the painting and the lady. Our heroine looks closely and sees that the girl really does have pink hair. This calms Liliana down, as it's rare to find someone with this hair color from birth. At this moment, a worried Madame Liston enters the girl's room. She hopes the news of the accident didn't scare Liliana too much, but our heroine calms the woman down and explains that everything is fine with her. Although the girl was not in the carriage during the tragedy, the attempt to kill her still frightens the owner of the house. After this, Madame Liston asks Liliana to join her. She leads a girl who has no idea where they are going. After some time, our heroine finds herself in a room with many outfits. Madame Liston explains that this is where she keeps her daughter's clothes. Although Caroline was raised as an heir to the family line, she was a sensitive and bright child. Liliana might want to try on some of her clothes, but the Empress is worried that this might be completely inappropriate. However, the Marquise assures her that there is nothing wrong with this, especially since there are no prying eyes here. After these words, Liliana happily agrees to put on one of the outfits. In this dazzling look, which she completed with a hat, our heroine looks very romantic. Madame Liston takes great pleasure in seeing her daughter's dress adorn someone else. At the same time, the Marquise reports that, after that incident with the carriage, she began to look at the world differently. Therefore, Liliana may not become the main empress if she does not want to. At the same time, the woman wants to help and ask the girl for something in return. With hope in her eyes, Madame Liston asks if Liliana is ready to become her goddaughter. Our heroine expected anything, but definitely not such an offer. After all, she's been seeing this woman for the second day, and she is already ready to make her her goddaughter. Moreover, the girl had never been offered such a proposal before in her life. Besides, becoming someone's goddaughter at her age is a bit late. At this point, Madame Liston explains that the incident with the carriage was not an accident. Before the accident, the horse was foaming at the mouth, and hibiscus extract was found on its tongue. This extract is harmless to humans and is used in cooking. But if a horse eats it, it first slowly goes crazy and then has convulsions. The imperial grooms could not have been unaware of this and were most likely bribed. Madame Liston believes that this was all part of the Gabriel family's plan. It was in their interests that the Empress should die in an accident in her carriage. Since the Gabriels consider Liliana their enemy, the Marquise asks for help to punish them. After all, the woman lives only with the thought that one day she will take revenge on those responsible for her daughter's death. At this point, Liliana decides to openly tell what Bail Gabriel offered her. For his help, he asked the girl to help Agrin become Empress. Madame Liston replies that Liliana can fulfill this condition, but even if she puts in all her efforts, and Agrina still doesn't take the throne, then nothing can be done. Of course, it is in the interests of the Gabriels and Liliana to ensure that Visti does not become Empress. In any case, Madame Liston promises to support our heroine after she regains her lands. However, this move will make the Gabriel family fear not only Liliana, but also the Marquise, and if they show cruelty, then our heroine will not be able to repel them all alone. That's why Madame Liston is going to be there as her godmother. Liliana is surprised that a woman is willing to go so far for her. The Marquise explains that in such moments, someone's support is very important. But Liliana's mother is far away, and so Madame Liston would like to be with the girl instead of her. This way, both of them will not be alone in their circumstances. Our heroine never expected to hear such sincere revelations, and the girl believes that Madame Liston is right in that she needs support. As darkness fell, Liliana could not sleep, because of the thought that she now had a godmother. In Nieta, her sister's godparents were very influential aristocrats. They taught the girls the unspoken rules of society and spent time with them, and little Liliana had to learn this, overcoming the shame of her mistakes. But now, in a foreign country, she had her own godmother. It's so amazing that our heroine can't calm down. There are still a few days left before her departure, and she wants to get to know her godmother better during this time. Perhaps she should even invite her for tea before returning home. While our heroine was thinking about the upcoming conversation, a strange sound was heard in the room. The girl froze in place as she heard the noise coming from the window. Could it be that the Duke found out where she was and sent an assassin to the Empress? At this time, an unknown man had already entered the girl's room. The first thing Liliana does is try to find something to protect herself with. With a sharp movement of her hand, she grabs a glass from the nightstand. Since it is too late to run, she swings it to throw it at the killer when he gets closer. But suddenly, wild fear gives way to genuine surprise. A man in a robe stops in front of a girl's bed, and she can't even move. At this moment, Liliana realizes that the uninvited guest is very familiar to her. After he removes his hood, our heroine recognizes him as the Emperor. Helio first reports that it seems that Liliana is fine and full of energy. Then he turns around and says that in that case he can leave. However, after such a long separation, Liliana cannot let him go. She asks the Emperor to stop and begins to fall out of bed. Helio notices this, and with one deft movement, picks up the girl. Liliana still can't believe that the Emperor came to her, but he can't even utter a word because of the feelings that overwhelm him. But instead of a sincere confession, Helio explains that the girl's death would bring him a lot of problems, and he came in person only because he would not allow a strange man to enter the Empress's chambers. After all, he rules the Empire, and everything that belongs to him will always be only his. However, Liliana had heard that there were many capable female knights in the Empire. If Helio had lost interest in her, he could have sent one of them. Until this moment, Liliana thought that the Emperor was tired of his annoying toy. However, what happened today has changed her mind a lot. After all, no one would climb through the window just to visit a cute canary. It turns out that Helio did not lose interest in her, since he himself came to her at night. Liliana clutches her blanket and gathers the courage to ask the Emperor directly about it. The girl wonders if he came here because he was worried about her. If Helio decides to push Liliana away now, it could solve everything. After all, then she will never have to suffer and become attached to a man again. She will no longer expect anything from the Emperor or hope for his kindness. This would be a better solution than continuing this unclear relationship. Helio thinks that in this way, he will relieve the girl from suffering. However, looking into her big and sincere eyes, he does not dare to tell her about it. The Emperor simply freezes in place and tries to fight his feelings, but his love for Liliana turns out to be stronger, and he has to agree with her. Helio decides that it would be better to finally confess everything. He sits down next to the girl and says that he was worried about her. His loss began the moment Liliana said she knew where her place was. Then she silently left his office, and Helio continued to maintain a cold tone. His assistant reported that the Empress looked very upset. The man became very angry and asked Turns not to report every little thing to him. He chased away the assistant and stained all the documents with broken ink. And at that moment, Turns decided not to tempt fate and immediately rushed out the door. Left alone, the Emperor began to reflect, standing in the place of his wife. But he delays punishment only because empty accusations undermine the reputation of the one who makes them. That is why now Helio has to remain silent and be with Liliana only in his memories. And because of this, he can't support her like before when she's sad. However, he no longer has the strength to leave the situation as it is. Helio abruptly gets up from the table and decides to try to catch up with his wife. He wants to explain everything to her and say that he was trying to protect her in this way. However, a maid near his office reports that the Empress has already boarded the carriage. Since Liliana had already left, Helio did not have time to tell her everything. But in the morning, the Emperor learned that Liliana's replacement carriage had been in an accident. Although he knew his wife was fine, the thought of a tragedy frightened him. So he sneaked into the Liston house to personally ensure Liliana's safety. After all, she came here from another country for political reasons. The man should have simply locked Liliana in the palace and not let her out. At the same time, Helio promised that he would take full responsibility. And since he's unable to bear his wife's tears, Helio tenderly kisses her hand. He asks the girl not to cry and explains that it is his fault. He had never been so attached to anyone before. So Helio decided that it would be better if he distanced himself from the girl. Liliana replies that she understands everything perfectly well with her mind, but it will take some time for her heart to understand. Helio is very glad that he was finally able to talk sincerely and explain everything to the girl. However, Liliana does not want Helio to leave her at all. After this, the Emperor begins to tease the girl again, hinting at intimacy if he stays. Seeing how he decides to stay a little longer, and our heroine tells him that Madame Liston has named her goddaughter. Although Helio is not particularly thrilled about this news, he is still glad that it is important to Liliana. After that, they talked for a long time and laughed at jokes. The girl also told him that the Marquise had let her try on her daughter's clothes. Based on his wife's story, Helio comes to the conclusion that the Listons will soon ask for their lands back. But at that moment, he notices that Liliana has already fallen into a deep sleep. Now he understands that it is really impossible to turn back. Before leaving, the man tenderly kisses his beloved on the head. Liliana never wakes up, clinging to her husband's robe. This night became the first time in a long time that she could be at peace. The next day, Liliana had to pretend to be injured and rush to the palace. She was sad to part with her godmother, but they agreed to meet another time. Our heroine has no doubt that the Duke was seething with anger when he learned that she was not in that carriage. And when she returned to the palace, Helio ordered to find out who caused this accident. As soon as Liliana heard about this, she immediately arranged a sumptuous dinner for the knights. At this point, all her main work was completed and she could relax. But one fine day, Minelli asked the Empress to spare her a minute. The head Princess Lucia asked me to convey that she wishes to discuss an important matter with the Empress.